stuff around here really quick. Okay, yeah, this works. I think I'm good with this here. Let me go fill up drink here really quick, and I will be right back over. Alright, yep, so I figured I shouldn't just be mainlining whiskey and coke. I should probably have some water nearby. So, yeah, that should hopefully help things out a little bit here. I'll have some of that here. And yes, thank you everybody for joining. I am Raxi. Apparently, as a winner of some sort of championship, I am uniquely endowed with the ability to exact my opinion upon an entire card game here. So, yes, I did want to do this on a stream as opposed to, like, on a YouTube video after the fact, because I'd love to hear other people's opinions as, I go and I voice my own opinions here. So we are talking about the Mythik card game here. For those not familiar with Mythik, I honestly want to say that, the playstyle is fairly close to Yu-Gi-Oh!, albeit with a pretty equal resource system. So a lot of these are kind of coming from that, mechanic. We've got 6 spots on the front of the board to put your champions and your mythics. The ones that are, directly responsible for, attacking and removing your opponent's heartbeats. The first player to hit 0 heartbeats loses. We've also got 6 back row slots for magics and fortifiers, which usually are cards that help to either develop your strategy or, protect your investment in your other resources. And then finally, there's a single general slot. And for the archetypes that do have generals, those usually end up creating the core basis of their gameplay here. Some of the archetypes here that I'll show do have, all 5 of those between generals, champions, mythics, magics, and fortifiers. Some are a little less complete. That doesn't necessarily make them any weaker than particular archetypes, but those are things that I am keeping in mind as I try to go about, putting things together for you guys. So, first thing I do want to mention when I am making tiers here, I was a little bit conflicted on calling them like, tier 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, as in what with like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Play traditionally or Pokemon play, or to go with like S tier, A tier, B tier, like, kind of grading them, kind of more of like a video game style. So obviously you could see that my decision was to, well, not make a decision, just put them both up there. But I am using these in the way of the card games, because, Mythic is a card game. So when I talk about tier 0, I'm talking about strategies that are format warping. I'm talking about the ones that dominate over meta play. They're the strategies that force you to either play that exact strategy or to play counters directly to that strategy to prevent it from working. If you try to, do your own thing and ignore the presence of that strategy, you will be walked over 100% of the time. That's how strong a tier 0 typically is in a meta that has those. Those types of strategies are typically ones that are hyper consistent, so they're always able to get the engine pieces that they need and always able to reach their desired end board. They are able to protect themselves from most forms of interruption that an enemy could, put out. And they can also usually and immediately prevent an opponent from reaching their own win condition. So a tier 0 might not win the game immediately, but it can make the game unwinnable for the opponent pretty much immediately, demanding either that you play the same strategy but faster, or that you have counters specifically to that strategy, maybe at the cost of, not running your own full strategy to be like, oh, I'm going to run half of my deck and half counters to a tier 0. So when I'm talking about tier 0, if I put anything in that tier, that's what I will be talking about. And that's kind of the criteria that I'm saying you need to hit tier 0. For tier 1, or what I'm calling A tier here, that's the meta. These are, strong archetypes. They all are going to, compete pretty evenly with other ones in their bracket. And the reason why they're going to be above other ones is they've got the right combination of 3 important factors here. Those 3 factors that I want to consider are, power. Does that archetype have a powerful strategy that can win a game? The second category is, speed. Are they able to make that strategy come out faster than other decks? So yeah, like you might end in a really big guy that kills your opponent, but can it do that faster than your opponent's big strategy? Because if it's too slow, then it doesn't matter how strong it is. It's too slow, it's not going to come off before an opponent beats you. And then finally, in addition to power and speed, you need consistency. You need cards that support you. You need cards that, help search for your strategy to make it come out more reliably. Ultimately, in a card game, you're playing with a deck of 50 or more cards. You can have a maximum of 3 copies of most of your main deck monsters and stuff. Absolutely, Vita. Speed is a critically important factor to card games. In fact, I would say that you need a lot of speed, a much higher number than typical card games allots for. I'd like to say, like, a number like 22 or something, but that's a little bit ridiculous for a card game, unfortunately. However, you can have up to 2 mythics and up to 2 generals of a specific copy of one of those. So yeah, 2 and 2, good numbers. Absolutely. So yeah, for a meta deck, you need that speed, you need that power, and you need that consistency. And if you're lacking in one or more of those factors, that'll probably put you in a lower tier. So tier 2, I'm calling those, strong strategies, strong archetypes. They're still powerful, they're still competitive. If you're a good enough pilot of that specific deck, of that specific archetype, of that specific strategy, you will be able to take games off of better decks. But you're probably missing one of those categories, between power, between speed, and between consistency. So for instance, like in terms of power, the ceiling of your deck may fall just a little bit short, where instead of overkilling somebody, you might only barely kill them, or if the opponent has defense, you might have to spend extra resources to get around that before you can get that killing blow in. You may be lacking in speed, you may not have a way to quickly get out your endgame board, or, you may not have the consistency tools to, search for your win conditions faster. So if you're missing just one of those, but you've still got an overall strong deck, I'd put that, in tier 2 in this B tier. Tier 3, the C tiers, at that point, I wouldn't really consider those necessarily powerful or competitive on their own. There may be a strategy present with the deck, but it's usually not going to be powerful enough to win games on its own. As far as its ability to execute that winning strategy, it's probably not any faster than a deck that, just doesn't have tools outright to get their stuff out faster. If they want to play a 10-cost card to win the game, they are probably spending 3 turns to, deploy it from their hand, like anybody else with a deck that doesn't have support. And then finally, these are the ones that, they're going to be particularly prone to enemy disruption. If they lose a resource, they probably don't have an easy way of getting it back. So at that point, like, if you've got a playable deck, if the cards are there to make a cohesive deck of that strategy, and it might be able to, reach a winning strategy, it's probably a bit weaker than the ones above it, and the second it's disrupted, it'll probably fold like a napkin. And then finally, at the bottom of the list, we've got tier 4, the D tiers, or what I'll call the rogues, or kind of the unplayables here. These, at this point, they probably don't have a strategy to win the game outright. They probably aren't able to execute whatever strategy they have any faster than the base game mechanics would allow for. Effectively, they don't have any cards to, cheat their resources out any faster. And, just like tier 3s, they're going to be prone to enemy disruption the moment that somebody drops a card to, stop their strategy from going off. They will probably just lose on the spot. So at that point, if they are in those bottom 2 tiers, there is not a lot separating them other than just, tier 3 has a strategy and tier 4 doesn't. So to start this off, I want to go with one of my favorite archetypes here. I've got the Aztecs here. The Aztecs are kind of a mini archetype. I was considering originally not actually raiding these because they have, their entire deck is 4 different champions, 2 magics, and, 2 mythics off in the mythic slot. So in total, if they max out the number of copies they've got of all of their cards, they've got, 18 spots in a 50 card deck. That's not even really enough to fill up half the deck. I put them in here because the Aztecs are a really good way of approaching, how to judge an archetype. So the Aztecs, they absolutely have winning cards on them. Their 2 mythics are incredibly strong, and usually deploying those on the board means your opponent doesn't have a way of winning anymore. They are notoriously powerful cards. So the first one here, might as well search these. So let's see. I've got card images somewhere, so let me go add a source because I am a fraud and I don't know how to stream. So let's go do my file explorer, shrink this off so people can't read things, make a new source so you guys can look at pictures of cards. Let's do a window capture, add a new source, explorer. I don't actually have to spell that right, it's totally fine. So this, and I will do, I will open up one of these here and open. And when I do this, I drag this over here and I will select photos, hopefully. There we go, there's photos. Excellent. So match title, otherwise find window of same type. Perfect. Okay, so that doesn't seem like it's quite loading here. It looks like a bird, a very small bird, spawned in chat for people who are actually playing the Pokemon game. It is there, I do like it. There was actually a cool little tournament thing for it earlier today. I lost that pretty much immediately, though. So let's open this up. Is this actually showing the image at all on the stream? It doesn't look like it. Yeah, Yes, it doesn't look like it's getting the images on here, so that is fine. I will work around this. Drop this source, and let's make a new one. I've got an idea. I've got a horrible idea. I'm going to introduce my favorite tool. I'm going to give us the old, let's see, add a new source. Yeah, no image, it's showing black. I got that here, so instead, I know something that won't show black. Good old Microsoft Paint. the best streamer resource, clearly. So let's zoom you in again a little bit here. Let's resize this so it shows entire cards. Yes, I'm totally not a scuffed streamer at all. No, sorry. This is how content is made. Alright, so I have Jaguar Warrior showing. This is just one of the regular champions, but this does give you a good opportunity to explain what the Aztecs do. The Aztecs are, an archetype that revolves around sacrificing your own cards off to get effects going off here. So the Jaguar Warrior, at 4, he's pretty cheap to deploy. You get 4 AP a turn. So, whenever you start your turn, you could always, deploy this guy if he's in your hand with those 4 action points. You can see on his card effect here, whenever another Aztec's sent to the grave, you can gain 2,000 heartbeats, those, life points in other words, and whenever he is sacrificed from anywhere, you can target an Aztec champion on your field, and you can permanently increase its attack by 4,000. A very powerful effect. So, with a lot of the Aztecs, they have effects, when cards are sacrificed, good things happen for you. But one of the rough parts about the deck is that, it doesn't have a lot of ways to get back those resources that it sacrificed. Once you sacrifice a card, it's gone. It's in your grave. You can't really get it back easily. And you only have, 6 cards in your opening hand to start with. 3 turns into the game, you maybe have seen a dozen cards out of your deck. Hey there, Madden. Thank you for joining. I will be adding things to the list here as I go. I'm just kind of explaining, kind of some of the stuff that I'm using to say, why I'm going to put a card in a given category here. So this one here, I do want to show you off here. So let's close this one. And we've got Huitzilopochtli, the Turquoise Prince. So this is one of the 2 mythics, one of the end boards for the Aztecs here. This is the type of card that's usually strong enough when you deploy this card, you can usually end up winning the game on that turn. Both of the Aztecs mythics have this really nice text on them saying that it cannot be eliminated on your turn. So the only way that an opponent can really interact with your cards on your turn is by using fortifiers or champion effects, and most of those able to, deal with your cards, do so by eliminating it. So once this guy's on the board, he's immune to basically anything your opponent can do, until, you take your turn and hope that your opponent survived. With Huitzilopochtli, once you deploy it, you force your opponent to sacrifice a bunch of cards until they have as many as you do. By the time you have this, you probably only have like 2 or 3 cards left, so you can force an opponent to sacrifice most of their board, and then at that point, you can dismantle the rest of their board, and then punch them for an extremely high number, given the fact that you had to sacrifice a bunch of Aztecs to get this guy out. His attack will probably get really big. So yeah, both of the Aztecs mythics have that, cannot be eliminated on its owner's turn rider effect, making them both incredibly powerful. So they absolutely have a win condition. So they're not D tier. They're at least C tier or above. But are they better than C tier? That's where I've got to look at the rest of the cards. So they have two magic cards. One of them, helps you to deploy Huitzilopochtli, and the other one here, that's Quetzalcoatl. Yeah, Quetzalcoatl is the other mythic here. And in order to deploy both of those, you need to go through some pretty serious deployment costs here. Specifically, in order to get these guys out, in order to make the strategy work. This card here, Summoning the Divine, is the major card that you need in order to get the strategy to go off here. So you need a card called Aztec Priest and 7 other light-type champions in your grave in order to deploy both of your Aztec mythics. Thankfully, it doesn't remove them, and this doesn't have a once per turn. So once this condition's met, you can activate 2 of these on the same turn and have both of your Aztec mythics out. In fact, they're both on the card. Well, actually, no. Quetzalcoatl and Priest are on the card, I believe. Yeah, Turquoise Prince is not there. But yeah, Quetzalcoatl's there. So yeah, having 2 of these, this makes your win condition, but it doesn't make it any easier. In fact, having, 8 light-type champions, with Aztec being a light by itself, is a very, very tough ask. So in order to make the deck work, you would hope that the other cards, go toward that strategy, that, they help you get all those extra light types in the grave. And the Aztecs don't. In fact, they don't make that easy. You have one card that helps with that. The other card on the card art here, the Aztec Priest. So while this card is on the field, you can sacrifice any champion you control in order to sacrifice an Aztec directly from your deck. So by using this guy, you could sacrifice any other champion on your board and take an Aztec directly out of your deck and dump it in the grave. In addition, like all the Aztec champions, whenever it is sacrificed, he boosts an Aztec on the board by 4,000. So ideally, with his effect, you'd want to sacrifice an Aztec out of your deck to buff either Priest or another Aztec on your board by 4,000, making them, a bit of an offensive threat. But none of the magics and none of the actual Aztec champions actually help you get back the cards that you sacrificed, making them very, very difficult to actually put their strategy off. So they don't have the searching, they don't have the speed, they have the power, but their power is just one very large attack into hopefully an undefended opponent. That can usually be the case between the 2 mythics. You can clear up most of their board. You can get Quetzalcoatl up to extremely massive numbers. And, you'll have 2 mythics, or maybe more on the board. But just having a powerful strategy alone is not enough. The Aztecs are just far too slow and far too unreliable at getting their strategy out to be good on their own. So I hope that in the future, the Aztecs do get some tools, either within the Aztec archetype or maybe outside of it, to help, get more Aztecs in the grave, or even just more light-type champions in the grave faster. But right now, in the game, those don't exist. So I'm going to do our first tier placement here. I'm going to put the Aztecs, by grabbing the actual browser window here, the Aztecs are going to go in C tier here. Now, the rest of the tiers are going to be a lot faster because I'm not going to go through, a full description of the archetypes here. But I'm using the Aztecs as a good example of explaining, why I'm going to position things where they are. I'll explain cards. I will, show things that they are absolutely Jonesy. They are a C tier archetype, A tier art, and they are A tier in my heart. I love these guys. I mean, I made a video on them. I like the Aztecs a lot. It's just that, right now, the Aztecs don't quite have what it takes to be an A tier archetype, in the game itself. They need a lot of outside support just to get additional light type champions. Thankfully, if you read Summoning of the Divine, it doesn't require that you have 8 Aztecs, only 8 light type champions. Unfortunately, those are kind of far and few in between, even across the rest of the game. I do know that Olympian Apollo is a light type, and he has synergy with cards getting eliminated and going to your grave, but not if he himself goes to the grave, and that makes it a little bit rough to, find a way to turbo lights into your grave. So yeah, Aztecs are a C tier here. Next up, from the upcoming and new Forbidden Tide set, we have the Camelot archetype here. I kind of threw Arthur as the signature unit of the deck here. The Camelot, they got a lot of cards in this upcoming set here. I believe we're looking at, 7 champions, a single general, Arthur. They've got a single fortifier, 4 magics, and 3 mythics in the mythic slot here. All of them are pretty powerful, but how does the deck itself play out? So, for the strategy itself, I think, and I believe a lot of people might agree with me that, are a little more familiar with the game, that the Camelot archetype plays the closest to modern Yu-Gi-Oh! That I've seen. They are extremely combo-heavy archetype. From deploying a single 2-cost champion on the board, they can end up with an end board that ends on a general, 2 7-cost units, and a mythic that can sacrifice itself off the board to allow both those cards to attack directly. So, thankfully, the cards themselves have low enough power that combo alone doesn't immediately drop an opponent to 0 heartbeats. Otherwise, we'd probably be looking at our first S tier in the game. But thankfully, all of the Camelot champions, they have pretty low attack. So even if you deploy Lancelot to have both your heartbeats and the heartbeats of an opponent, having direct attack with Gawain and Lancelot is not enough to drop your opponent to 0. And moreover, it might put you in a pretty perilous state. Although if you're playing in the full Camelot archetype, you do have access to cards that let you attack twice in a turn, you have access to removal, you have access to more archetype support, you have access to more consistency, meaning that, sometimes if you can kind of pick and choose your opening hand, you might very well be able to find a way to immediately kill somebody on your first attack. So, that alone is kind of tempting to, throw this in, A tier, but I do want to talk about, their consistency pieces and, the speed at which they deploy things. So, the fact that they can, combo pretty quickly and search through a lot of cards, they've got that 2-cost champion Nimue, that allows you to search out and basically have your general for free in your hand. So it's adding you cards. Arthur allows you to tag out any Camelot champion on your field to get a different one out of your deck. I'm searching for these here really quick so I can kind of explain, what these look like here. So yes, let's throw you up on here. So yeah, this is the 2-cost champion Nimue. She lets you search Arthur. So I will drop you here. So yep, so it lets you search Arthur, the general. That lets you return Nimue to your board to deploy another champion. With that, you generally want to deploy this guy here, Tristan. When you deploy Tristan, his only effect is to let you deploy another card from your deck. You use Tristan to get Isolde out on the board for free. Isolde's effect is not particularly great. You can eliminate your Tristan to, make a champion or general unable to be eliminated, but that doesn't matter because now you've supposedly turned one card into a general and 2 champions on the board. So that's where your first Mythik comes into play here. Because their big Mythic, one of the big cards that makes the deck really combo off, is Merlin. Merlin lets you shuffle 2 champions off your board to deploy 2 different Camelot champions from your deck. So what you use Merlin to do is you use Merlin and you can deploy 2 cards here. So you'd want Merlin to deploy, sorry, not Galahad, Galahad's a bit weak. You want to deploy Gawain, which, he's just a big attack guy for Camelot at least. But he lets you, discard a card from your hand to, eliminate a card on the field, maybe a pesky defender or a scary back row card that could interfere with an attack. And then the other card you want to deploy is Lancelot, because not only does Lancelot have the most attack of all of the Camelot champions, he's also the one that, makes your opponent just lose half your heartbeats. So between Lancelot and Gawain, you have cut your opponent for 12,500 damage, and you can poke in for an extra 1,000 once you've deployed the other Mythic that I'm talking about on the board, because right now your board is, those 2 high-cost champions that are, levels 12 and above combined. So that lets you, since you control Arthur and Camelot champions 12 or higher, you can deploy Excalibur. And with Excalibur, you can have Excalibur sacrifice a Camelot champion, which Excalibur now counts as, and all your Camelot champions can attack opponents directly. So yeah, even if the opponent has scary face-down champions you don't want to deal with, or really big guys that you couldn't get rid of, you can poke directly for about 10,000 heartbeats. That might be enough to close out a game if it's been going on for a while, or get your opponent down to a scary low amount of heartbeats on your first turn of attacking. So yeah, that's the strategy, the fact that you can get this all off extremely quick and extremely reliably, searching through a lot of your deck with very little effort, makes this a pretty easy tiering decision. Camelot is going to be our first A tier. And I don't think a lot of people would argue with that. But, we'll see what people have to say about it here. Now, the next archetype I want to touch on is another new one, although this is kind of more of a mini archetype from Forbidden Tides. We are going to look at the Gaelics. Now, the Gaelics are a very weird archetype. We had a Gaelic actually released in the first set, Ancient Legends, although it was kind of just retroactively considered a Gaelic. We had Nessie, one of the best mythics in the game, but Nessie has absolutely no synergy with its archetype, because the Gaelic archetype, they revolve entirely around low-cost, well, exactly 3-cost champions that, they all share this effect that they cannot be eliminated in battle while in attack stance, and they all help with burning down heartbeats, so they're the burn strategy of the game. They focus on, directly dealing damage to the opponent, and, you can see that they can't be eliminated in battle while in attack stance. But that's usually bad for you, because if the opponent is able to attack that, all of their damage is coming directly back at you. So yeah, you burnt the opponent for maybe 1,000 and 2,000 and another 1,000 in a turn. But if they deployed like a 10,000 attack guy and attacked directly, you took 10,000 in a turn. You're going to lose that race. So, thankfully, the Gaelic have a card to deal with this that makes the entire archetype work. and that is their Enduring field spell here, the Otherworld. So you take no damage from any battles involving the Gaelic champions you control. So with this on the board, plus a bunch of Gaelics in attack stance, consistently burning your opponent down, that becomes a very frustrating race that you can win. In addition, one of their magic cards is not really a tool to help speed up the deck in particular, but it does help with a bit of recursion, because they have the Festival of Samhain at All Hallows Eve, I think is the name. And that allows you to resurrect any level 3 champion from your grave back to the board. So even if the opponent was able to, take a Gaelic off your board, you can put it right back on and start burning all over again. So, they have a strategy. It's capable of winning a game, but it's a burn strategy in the end. It's slow. It can be countered, if an opponent is able to, take Otherworld off of your board, you all of a sudden are in a very perilous state. Now, there are cards that exist outside of the Gaelic archetype to help protect your Otherworld, and you can get other copies, but searching for other copies is pretty hard. Without the Otherworld, your winning strategy quickly becomes a losing one here. But, it is a pretty resilient strategy. It combos well with other archetypes. And, it is capable of winning games, albeit a bit slowly. So I'm going to put the Gaelic here, I'm going to put them squarely in B tier. They've got a strategy, it can win games, but it's slow, it's lacking a little bit in reliability, but, it does become matchup dependent here, so they're absolutely not an A tier, and they feel a little bit lacking in resources enough that I might consider them putting in B tier. If I felt like making like a B.5 tier or a 2.5, they'd go in that. But, I think Gaelic fit pretty squarely in the middle of the board here. Yeah, B tier for burn. B for burn. Good way of putting it here. Next up here, we've got the Heavenly, the Egyptian style archetype here. This is one of the old ones, one of the 2 archetypes that got a starter deck. So it has had a lot of support. I think it's gotten cards in every single set to come out. Albeit, with Forbidden Tides, a lot of those are just going to be reprints rather than, outright adding new cards to, expand the strategy. But it is making them a bit more approachable for new players. To get access to, it's giving them the, the archetype templating and the better prints. So I'm going to go over, what the Heavenly have. So as far as the number of cards they've got 9 unique champions, they've got a Fortifier, 8 magics, and 5 mythics for the mythic slot here. They've got enough cards where you can just build a Heavenly deck and not really have to splash in anything other than maybe some generic support. As far as a winning strategy, they absolutely have a winning strategy here. So they have the Heavenly trio of extra deck of mythic slot cards. Their main strategy revolves around 3 specific mythics, and they all have text where when they are eliminated, they go to the next mythic in the cycle, and the cycle continues once it goes back to the original one. So, with them on the board, they can become an incredibly efficient resource loop that can disrupt the opponent, that can put a lot of damage on the board, and, can generally win the game. So they have a winning strategy. They're not D tier. In addition, they have a lot of support. They have a lot of cards that, help them get their specific cards out. All right, let's actually show the cards off here. So let's see. So this is one of the 3 mythics in the cycle here. We've got Heavenly Pharaoh Khnum. You can see from his power he can only be deployed by Atum Ra, the mythic before him, and you can return this one to the slot to deploy Khepri, the first part of the cycle here. And if Khnum is ever eliminated, you can just deploy Khepri your next turn. So this one's the best one to show off, just kind of the fact that the cycle exists and what it does. The Setting Sun is, arguably the weakest of three. He just exists to get you back to the first part of the cycle. The second part here, the Midday Sun, Atum Ra, is by far the most powerful part of the cycle here. At 15,000 attack, I think only a single printed card, well, two printed cards technically go above that in attack. One of them is, actually both of them are just incredibly hard to get, prohibitively hard. Actually, no, three. Xiangyu out of the Three Kingdoms, I think, is 16,000. But his attack score is incredibly high. Whenever this one is eliminated for any reason, be it you eliminating it or opponent eliminating it, you can just immediately deploy Khnum, the other one that I had there before, and while he's on the board, he forces all of your opponent's cards to be face up. So you immediately know, what, deadly traps are hiding in the back row. So, him alone being on the board is incredibly scary because you know exactly what cards you need to target and remove. And the other heavenly here, the Rising Sun. I can find you in my list here. I am not blind, I swear. There we go. Wait, no, where did he go? I'm not seeing him, actually. Where is Khepri the Rising Sun? Well, I'm just blind. I'm not seeing him at the moment here. So, yeah, he will show up at some point. But I wanted to get a little bit more into the support, just, to show you that it exists. One of those here is, let's see, not that one here. Let's go with, yeah, Fertility of the Nile here. To go over speed, he just lets you play a heavenly champion from your hand at no cost. The Heavenly does have a lot of high-cost champions that you want to deploy, like Horus, for instance. Horus letting you turbo out the enduring Heavenly cards that you need to deploy Khepri. So the strategy is, pretty fast. It has speed cards to it. It has, it has a bit of resiliency, especially once you get to your strategy. But are those enough to push it to A tier? Are those enough to get it out of C tier? Honestly, looking at a lot of the cards that are currently out, the Heavenlies are pretty prone to disruption. In order to get Khepri out, you need a bunch of specific cards to be on the board at the same time. So you either need to, keep those in your hand and not benefit from them, or need to deploy them on the board and hope that the opponent doesn't eliminate them. So I believe that, the Heavenly is a very fair B tier inclusion here. They've got a strategy, it's pretty strong. The time to get that strategy out is fair. It's nowhere near as fast as the Camelot, who's able to get to its strategy in a single turn. Like with the Heavenlies, that usually takes multiple turns of gathering the exact combo pieces you need to start the God cycle. You need to get the gods out themselves. And even when you have them out, it's not necessarily winning you the game on the spot, although it is getting you very close. So I believe that the Heavenly have everything they need to be, a good part of the strategy, a good part of a Mythic deck, and, just a good Mythic deck in and of itself. But they're not particularly strong or particularly fast enough to push them to A tier to really be meta at the moment. So I believe that B tier for the heavenly, for our Egyptian boys, is fair. Next up are the Iga. So, since I decided to add the Aztecs in, I also added the Iga in. The Iga, they're not really a real archetype. I believe, I treat them more as like an offshoot of the Sengoku. The Sengoku really have 3 archetypes under their umbrella. They've got the Sengoku themselves. They got the samurai that are up front and causing problems for the opponent. The Iga, as you can see from the ninjas here, it is the ninjas. They're hiding in the shadow. They are, part of the family. There are even a few Sengoku/Iga dual archetype cards. So, they count as part of the archetype, but adding them into the deck usually means an inclusion of, all 4 of their, magic and fortifier cards, as well as the Sengoku Iga Champion Hattori Hanzo, and the Sengoku Iga Mythik Onino Hanzo. So I'll pull up the champion here because I think he kind of explains a lot of what the deck does. So let's go to Sengoku Samurai Hattori Hanzo. So, this one here is Sengoku and Iga, but he doesn't really fit specifically in a Sengoku deck by himself because, his stats are pretty low. For a 6-cost champion that takes a lot of effort to get out, 3,000 attack and 3,000 defense are rather low, underwhelming. They're getting beaten up by cards weaker than him. But that's not his benefit here, because he's getting Iga cards out of your deck onto the board face down. Whenever he gets eliminated in battle, it eliminates the champion that eliminated him, and if he gets, eliminated by a card power instead, you can deploy a second Iga card from your deck face down. Having 2 Iga cards face down is critical for getting the Mythic out, and the Mythic itself is very great, but in order to play the Mythic, and in order to get the most mileage out of Hattori Hanzo, you need to be running the Iga cards. So I'm going to pull up one of those here. So I believe Iga Sabotage is, I think, like one of the most important ones to just, stay aware of here, because it's a very powerful effect. So if an opponent has 3 or more face-down magic and fortifiers, you can eliminate all of those face-down magic and fortifiers. It's a card that's, strong enough where if you think that your opponent even has a chance of running this in their deck, like not even if they're running Iga, they can just run this as a splash in any deck. So if the opponent has that card, they can immediately blow up your entire defensive round and, probably just beat you at that point. Using 1 card to get rid of 3 is incredibly advantageous. I usually try to avoid any scenario where I have 3 face down back row, specifically due to this card. However, because I know about this card, because a lot of people know about this card, they're usually going to try to avoid ever having 3 face down back row, making this card's applications very limited. Like, a lot of times this card will be sitting in an opponent's hand while an opponent is just waiting to, see you set your 3rd face down back row so they can blow it up. Since I see it next to this in this list here, Iga Shuriken is another good one here to mention. Again, a very general useful effect. You can target a champion in defense stance and eliminate it. It could be one of yours, it can be an opponent's, it'll usually be an opponent's. It seems like a strong effect, like a card that you would want in your deck, but the problem with Iga comes out, specifically with Iga Shuriken, because there are a lot of cards that exist that are just better than the Iga cards in any way. So Angulimala, the Butcher of 10,000, it's part of the Enlightened archetype, which doesn't have enough cards to be a real archetype, so they're not on the list. But this card here eliminates all champions in defense stance on an opponent's field. It is straight up unarguably better than Iga Shuriken. At the worst, in the worst case, Angulimala is equal to Shuriken. And in a lot of cases, if opponent only has a single defense stance, you might not feel too much of a loss from, running Iga Shuriken instead of Angulimala. But the fact is, in order to run the Iga cards, you're making a lot of small sacrifices like that. You're adding cards in that are playable, but not quite great. So Iga Agent, the one that I'm kind of using to, showcase the archetype down here, whenever an opponent attacks, you can reduce that opponent's attack and defense by half. It's a nice card, but there are a lot of general cards that do a lot better at, dealing with an opponent attacking you by, outright destroying that with Endless Chasm. You can force that opponent to attack another champion instead. You can have your champion get destroyed and revive it immediately and destroy that attacking champion with Feigned Retreat. There are a lot of better cards that do what Iga Agent, purports to do. So making enough of those sacrifices to run Iga is part of that strategy for trying to add Iga into your Sengoku strategy. In addition, running the Iga on their own is a little rough, because the best, well, actually, no, first, let me explain the Mythik here, because I think the Mythik is the best card to explain, why the deck might have a bit of struggle fully running to its best capability here. So we've got here the Sengoku Samurai Onino Hanzo. Let's close this one off here first. Yeah, so the Mythik here, you need to be able to sacrifice Hattori Hanzo on your board, you need to shuffle 2 Igas from your field or grave into your deck, and you need to control a Sengoku General. Now, there is a Sengoku General, Oda Nobunaga, that's pretty good as a general card, but, he only benefits if you have other Sengoku cards to play with him, which you will with Hanzo, so, that kind of works on its own. Has a little bit of a splash package, but it's a bit rough to ask. But, whenever you activate an Iga card's power, you can target and eliminate a champion on the board. That's very nice, but, with the 4 Iga cards that you're activating, the 2 Magics and the 2 Fortifiers, only one of them is a card that you can activate, at your leisure. And that's Iga Smokescreen, which you can activate whenever you want, but all that does is it acts as battle protection specifically for your Sengoku champions. So if you're not running other Sengoku champions, it's not that good of a card. So, in the end, all of this for me to put the to put the Igas as an archetype on its own into a category, I believe that this is a fair B-tier inclusion here. The Igas, they absolutely have a strategy. The Mythik for them is very strong, and they have a lot of strong cards attached to them. The strategy isn't particularly one that's capable of winning games on its own, but it can make a game, very difficult for an opponent to win. But you are making a lot of sacrifices in order to pull that off. I am tempted to, slide them into that same B.5 tier that I was kind of considering for the Galix. But, I think B tier for the Iga is fair. If you're wanting to add this to a Sengoku, whatever I put the Sengoku as, I'm kind of considering that, total deck has to be like an average between the two. So if I decide that Sengoku are B as well, then, they fit in. If I decide that the Sengoku are broken S tier, then I might say that, Iga Sengoku might fall down to an A tier. But we'll get there once I get there in the alphabet. I've still got 6 archetypes in front of them to place. Next up here, we've got the Mermaiden. Mermaiden are an older archetype. They showed up in Ancient Legends, and I believe they all got a reprint, some updated stats, and new art in Forbidden Tides. Quite fitting with the Tides theme. You can't not have mermaids in there, right? Sorry about that, I was getting a drink really quick. So, for the Mermaiden, they have a pretty interesting strategy. This is one that shows up in a lot of card games. The Mermaiden revolve around life gain. So all of the Mermaiden champions, they have effects that either help you to gain life, or effects that, go off whenever you gain life. So for instance, for Mermaiden Healer Vi, whenever you gain heartbeats during any player's turn, you can deploy a Mermaiden champion from your grave. You can only use this once a turn, so you can't, cheat out a million if you've got a million gain heartbeat effects. But it is still, a pretty good card. This is recurring things from your grave. You can see from the kind of low stats on these champions here that it's pretty reasonable that a lot of these will be hitting the grave. But how good does that make them in particular? Well, their heartbeat effect. Their heartbeat gain related effects are a little bit conditional here. So for Kokoa here, you need to be controlling another Mermaiden champion in order to, gain a heartbeat. You can only do this one on your turn because, it's an activated effect. It doesn't have that on any player's turn whenever blah blah blah. So this is one you can only activate on your turn to gain 1,000 heartbeats, which could then, with that Healer Vi, let you resurrect another Mermaiden. Pretty good effects. Their key card here, their biggest card here, not their key card here. Their biggest one is Mermaiden Empress Muliwai. This is a card that actually got a stat buff in Forbidden Tides, so she has 7,000 attack and 9,000 defense now. A lot bigger of a card here, and you can, target a champion on the field, pay heartbeats equal to its defense, and eliminate it. With a deck like this, that revolves around heartbeat gain, you'll be gaining a lot of heartbeats. You might as well use them for something. So yeah, having effect to, eliminate a champion is pretty good. The most important one here that I like to focus on, that I've seen get good usage, is Mermaiden Siren. So once per turn during any player's turn, whenever you gain heartbeats, you can eliminate a champion on the board. So if you have ways of gaining heartbeats on an opponent's turn, you can utilize that and eliminate things on your opponent's turn. Or otherwise, you can gain heartbeats in several ways with this deck to, start tearing apart your opponent's board. So all in all, the Mermaiden, they have a cohesive strategy. They have enough cards, and they even have that tiny little bit of grave recursion. So at the very least, they're not D tier. Like, they are playable. You can make a deck. You could even possibly win a game with that deck. But do they deserve to be C tier or above C tier? I honestly don't think so. They do have that grave recursion, but it requires you having multiple Mermaidens on the board, or at least multiple ways of gaining heartbeats. Heartbeat gain effects, even stapled to the Mermaiden cards, is kind of rare. I believe the Mermaiden have exactly 2 ways of gaining heartbeats. Maybe 3. Oh yeah, so Kokoa is the one that I showed. It is just 2. Well, actually, let me go through all these here really quick. So Kekai, that just kind of turbos out another Mermaiden from your deck. So it's got a little bit of speed there, but it's not incredibly helpful because the only thing that you'd search for that's a little bit faster than Kekai is Muliwai. Not that great. Mermaiden Hunter pair. This is another, pay those heartbeats to, reduce the attack of a champion permanently. Not a great effect. Ki is the one here that you can use to gain heartbeats, especially during an opponent's turn, because you're only getting attacked on an opponent's turn. So you can kind of dissuade them from attacking a little bit, because if you got Siren on the board, then you know if they attack, you gain heartbeats, and you can just blow up their attacker while they're attacking. So yeah, how do I place these guys? Are they any better than C tier? Honestly, I'm going to say no here. You know, just gaining heartbeats and using that to just eliminate champions is not enough. They don't have a lot of cards that, you know, that can poke for game. Deploying a lot of very tiny mermaids on the board isn't really enough to, you know, get through things. Yeah, the mermaiden, I think, is a pretty easy C tier. I explained, like, you know, what the Gaelic do, what the Ega do. The mermaiden are below that. So C tier seems fair, but they are absolutely not D tier because they still have a cohesive strategy. They can still be used, you know, maybe as like small little jump blockers for another strategy, or, you know, a little bit of like defensive utility along something else that you're trying to do. But as, you know, as a winning strategy on their own, they don't really have it. Next up, we have the Mongols. I've got those represented by Genghis Khan here. This is one of the old ones from Ancient Legends. The first set here, they actually have quite a lot of cards here. They've got 7 unique champions, 2 fortifiers, 4 generals, which is quite a lot for an archetype, and 5 magics. A pretty helpful smattering of a lot of useful cards. Among those, they have a lot of incredibly high rarity, hard to get cards. I tried to keep rarity out of this as a discussion topic and just view the deck in terms of its ability to win. So, but I do absolutely need to mention the rarities for Mongols. They're not there. A lot of the cards that make the Mongol archetype work are rarity gated in a set where it's very hard to, you know, get the key cards for it. So that absolutely becomes a factor in, you know, real tabletop play. But if you're trying to play on, say, Untap or Tabletop Simulator where we've got all the cards uploaded, you know, you can make a Mongol deck. Is it really a winning strategy, though? Honestly, no. The Mongol strategy revolves around putting a bunch of very tiny guys on the board with extremely negative effects. They don't really splash well with other strategies, so you've got to make, like, you know, a mono Mongol deck if you're trying to win with it. Yeah, so yes, absolutely, Jonesy. So yeah, if I wanted to, you know, make this solely about rarity and accessibility, that makes this, you know, kind of a different discussion here. But I do have to mention the rarity absolutely for the Mongols, as well as for 2 other archetypes on this list. It's just, it becomes an egregious problem for, you know, making those on tabletop versus making them online. But I'm trying to ignore that for, you know, actually tiering these themselves. Because, you know, people will play online eventually. Like, I'm already working on an updated version of my deck for online play. But the Mongols, their strategy isn't particularly cohesive. It is bring lots of extremely small guys on the board by, you know, by spending a ton of resources, and maybe making those small guys a little bit bigger. So their strategy is not really capable of winning in any particular way. As far as, like, consistency goes, they're kind of lacking that as well. So let me pull up some of the Mongols here. So I'm going to pull up one of these rare cards. So, yeah, Mongol Steppe. Whenever an opponent eliminates one of your Mongol champions, you can draw a card. This can go off as many times as you want, which sounds quite nice. Drawing cards is always good, but you're limited by how many you can still deploy. Because when you're spending your AP to deploy cards, you're not deploying like really strong cards here. You're deploying a 4-cost 1000 attack champion that makes another 1000 attack champion. A lot of their cards are just, rather weak. The Mongol Mounted Archer, it's another 4 costs. And, you can deploy it for free, but it's still only 2000 attack. Like, these stats are so weak for the cost on this that the deck, it uses the Mounted Archer's bow and shoots itself right in the foot. So the Mongols here, they're going to be the first D tier entry on the list. Whereas Muliwai, it has usages, it has utility, it can be played. It's not really there as far as an archetype. There is a lot of problems going for it. I believe the Mongols are below even the Mermaidens on this here. So if you don't think that, the Mermaidens should be above this and you think that they could be D tier, there's probably a good argument for that. But the Mongols are, bottom of the bucket here. They have just enough going for them where, they have a cohesive strategy that makes a deck that, can play the game of Mythic, but it's not really in a way that's conducive to winning the game. If Mythic turned into a video game, the Mongols would be the generic books, the random enemies, the chaff, the cannon fodder that you're fighting against. They excel at, being cannon fodder for an opponent. Very sad, but, yeah, they're absolutely a D tier here. So, yeah, Jonesy, I'm tempted to throw Mermaiden in D. In fact, I might do that anyway. I had them in C tier on my list. I've seen them run. I've seen them play. They can do things. There is support outside of the deck that makes Heartbeat Gain actually work. The fact that they have, a lot of ways of eliminating or disabling cards is nice. It makes it cohesive enough where, they're not outright losing the game by utilizing their strategy. So that's why I'm, putting them in C tier, but honestly, a decent argument to put them in D tier is probably enough to put them in D tier for me. I'm very shaky specifically on, the Mermaiden. But while we are thinking about that, because I can always, drag these guys around later if I felt like it. See, look, it's in D tier, now it's in C tier again. But let's talk about the Norse. The Norse are exciting. The Norse are getting a structure deck soon. A starter deck that people can play that is going to come with, easily accessible copies of pretty high rarity cards that make the deck work. A big thorn in the side of, playing Norse with the actual physical cards is that the Norse cards themselves, a lot of them gravitate around a 3-cost general, Norse Thor, Lord of Thunder. Now, I have him in the small image down there, but I do want to show off what he does, because he does have a very cool effect, and an even cooler full art version here. So Thor, kind of goes over the strategy and the mechanics of the deck here. So while you have a Norse champion, and while you have fewer heartbeats than an opponent, you can eliminate a champion on the field whose attack is less than or equal to, the difference in how low your heartbeats are compared to your opponent. So the Norse, they focus on being right at the border of life and death. And, coming back and doing extremely nasty effects and, doing come from behind play. They have a lot of cards. They are a very popular archetype. They have 14 unique champions, 3 fortifiers, 2 generals, 8 magics, and 4 mythics. Now, a lot of those cards are high rarity. So, like for instance, their in-archetype Champion Searcher is a 3, making it very hard to deploy. Ren and Wild Norseman both have cards in this deck. They both help the Norse archetype, and they are both rarity gated. Mimir is a general that is in the starter deck, although it is very good as a general splash card in any deck. Thor is, a rarity 3 card, the full art being rarity 4, but a rarity 3 copy will be available in the deck. You also have a magic card that helps you deploy one of the other mythics. You have a very good enduring support card, and you have kind of the card that helps you, pull those come from behind wins, the Warriors Valhalla magic card. Yeah, I know that I would have loved to see the Norse Battle deck have Heimdall. I think it's a card that could have really benefited being in that deck. But, having Mimir stapled to it that, it can get is, very nice. Because if you build if you get the Norse deck and you decide that you want to run something else, you can pull Mimir out of that deck and splash it in another deck. It's a great, powerful, generic card. In fact, I'll pull Mimir up to show you what you guys are missing out on here. So Mimir, the Severed Head of Wisdom. Instead of drawing a card for your turn, you could look at the top 3, pick any one of those, and add that card to your hand. So it lets you kind of, curate what you want to draw. Very, very helpful card. And yeah, it's not Norse specific. It doesn't need to have lower health or to have a Norse champion. So it's a good splash card for a lot of decks. So yeah, a lot of the Norse cards are incredibly good. They have a lot of, prohibitively high-cost champions, like, Surt the Earthburner. They have, let's see, I think Hell, the Underworld Governess is another one. That's an 8 cost. Now, Hell is a 0 attack, but it's immortal, so it can't be destroyed in combat. Whenever you take damage from battles involving this card, Hell will gain that attack permanently. Since you want to be at low health, you use Hell, ram into a big attacker, you don't die, you gain that attack, you take a lot of heartbeats, and now, a lot of your Norse-specific I need to be at low health effects can, immediately go off at that point. So they have a lot of strong cards, and do they have ways to get them out fast? Well, absolutely. The Norse archetype has a lot of very strong cards, albeit a lot of them are rarity gated here. So Asgard is amazing because you can deploy your Norse champs for half of their cost. That Cert that I showed you earlier, that's a 10 cost. You can, have this and deploy Cert at a 5 cost instead. That's like, barely a turn worth of AP. And also gives you a way to, kind of get back heartbeats in case you've spent a little bit too many, you need that defensive utility. So it has, it has cards that are strong, it has cards that are fast. Heimdall's another one that I'm going to bring up here because it's the tutor. Feebas is not a card that I'm going to bring up, but it is a Pokemon I'm going to catch here. There we go, let's see how all that goes. But yeah, let's go back to Heimdall. The Norse, since they have so many champions and so many support cards, they do a lot of things. And Heimdall's kind of one of the cards that makes that work, because he lets you, add any Norse champion to your hand, or if you've got lower heartbeats, you can deploy it directly to your field. So, as Jonesy mentioned, Heimdall and Cert is a dreadfully powerful combination. You can just immediately tutor out, a 10,000 attack, 10 cost champion. that has a pretty nasty effect staple to them. So yeah, this deck plays pretty quick, it plays pretty strong, but, that rarity is a little thing that's kinda, digging at the back of my mind here. I'm not gonna count it for it though. But where do I put the Norse on this? Well, the Norse, they have a fatal flaw. Well, they have a fatal flaw, and their game mechanic, makes it even more devastating here. The Norse, they aren't really built to protect themselves all too much. Now, they have some defensive utility cards, absolutely. So, Baldur the Bleeding Prince is a very famous card in the game. It, regularly shows up outside of its own archetype as a defensive card for a lot of other decks. So, while Baldur's, in defense stance on your board, it basically stays on the board and protects you forever from attacks. But, he does fall apart immediately the second, a magic or a fortifier so much as looks in its direction. But, a Baldur alone isn't really dealing with the critical failing of Norse in that, they can't protect themselves. They don't have cards that get around the fact that an opponent is going to try to eliminate their cards or attack them. The Norse have a lot of cards that, specifically cut into their own heartbeats in order to pull off their effects. So, if it makes it to an opponent's turn, they're normally looking at an opponent that has half of its heartbeats. Well, if the Norse go first, they cut their heartbeats in half. Their opponent could be Camelot and, immediately win the game. Their opponent could be a lot of things that could, either eliminate their board and take advantage of the fact that they have low health, or, they're particularly susceptible to fortifiers as well. So, the Norse might get a big, scary end board card, only for it to get eliminated by, a Feigned Retreat. So, where do I place the Norse? I believe the Norse are a pretty solid B tier. They have the speed, they have the power, they have a winning strategy. But, it takes a bit of investment, a little bit of cost to, get them fully up and going to the point where, they can drop an opponent to 0 heartbeats. That might take a few turns. But, I believe they're a pretty solid B tier. I think they fall just a little short of being meta. Like, I'd be tempted to throw them in, B.5, but they're not quite A, in my opinion here. I believe B is incredibly fair for the Norse. But, as the discussions go on, as more things end up in the tiers, you are welcome to bring in your opinions. Although, unlike, Mermaidens to D tier, possibly, I probably will need a little bit better of an argument to, take Norse out of B and put them somewhere else. Absolutely not B to C, though. That won't be a thing. Not with the amount of support that Norse has gotten. Now, next up, we have the Olympians. This is another one of the decks that, not only did it get one of the original starter decks alongside the Heavenly, it's also getting one of the battle decks alongside the Norse. So we'll be seeing, pretty modern support for an Olympian deck as well. It will have its Magic Card Searcher Demeter, pretty easily accessible, as well as, Zeus, the figurestone mythic of the deck. Now, the Olympians, they have, they have a lot of support as well, being an old set 1 archetype that has continued to receive reprints throughout the sets. They have 15 champions, 3 fortifiers, 2 generals, 7 magics, and 5 mythics. In fact, it's 1 more card than the Norse have access to. Although, with 25-something cards each, an extra card doesn't particularly matter too much. Their support all looks pretty the same. You know, they've got one more champion, the same number of fortifiers, same number of generals, one fewer magic, and one more mythic. Again, it's mostly splitting hairs. I will say, you know, their better cards are, I'm not going to say, oh, okay, yeah, they are less rarity gated, absolutely. So they have, you know, technically 7 cards that, you know, tie to the archetype that are at rarity 3 or higher, but some of them just, you know, don't need to be counted in particular. So, one of those is the Meter. That is a champion that searches for magic cards. Let me pull that one out, actually, just so that we can look at a card while we're here. Olympian Demeter, where are you? Not in Twilight Immortal, that's where. So Olympian Demeter, let's pull you up. Because this is a rarity 3 that is getting a reprint in that structure deck. Whoops, I didn't want to move that window. I wanted to move. Thank you. There we go. Move the card. Perfect. There we go. Yeah, so Olympian Demeter, very nice one here. Yeah, you can see whenever it's deployed, you can add a magic or fortifier of the Olympian archetype from your deck to your hand. And it is a 4 cost. It has pretty decent stats on it. A 3,000, 4,000 for a cost 4 is, you know, right up there with some of the best stat line that a cost 4 can get. It's a good card. Very good one. It was, you know, not great having that rarity gated, but, you know, now that it's more accessible, or will be more accessible in a month, this, you know, becomes an easy addition to Olympian-themed decks. Next up is Olympian Medusa. Olympian Medusa has the, you know, the luxury, the privilege of being the only card to receive any sort of like ban or limitation action so far in the game. Olympian Medusa is so strong it is limited to 1 copy, but it doesn't particularly matter for the Olympian archetype, as its effect isn't Olympian specific. In fact, it's a very good splash card in literally every deck in the game. In fact, if you own a Olympian Medusa, it should be in every single deck of yours. So yeah, as you can see here, you know, it's a fortifier. Whenever an opponent attacks you, you can negate it, flip it face up, negate its effects, and keep it from attacking forever. And then at the end of that turn, you can just set Medusa back face down, and, you know, redo it again next turn when you get attacked again. It's incredibly efficient at, you know, just tearing apart an opponent's offensive line. It deserved the limitation at 1. It might even deserve a ban. Who knows? But, you know, even the card, though this card is part of the Olympian archetype, it's not really one that you need for the Olympian deck to work. So it doesn't really count. Zeus is the Mythik, one of the 2, you know, notable Mythics for the archetype here, the other one being Hades. Now, I did say there are 5 Mythics in the Olympian archetype, because there are absolutely more than that. But 2 of them are just kind of general splash cards, and then the last one I'll bring up at the end of this rarity list here. The next one here I've got to mention, and, you know, one of the ones that makes this deck incredibly powerful, is the best archetype support any deck could get, Mount Olympus. Once per turn, as long as you control an Olympian champion, you can add a different Olympian champion from your deck to your hand. You can't deploy that card that turn, but, you know, other than that, the only other restriction is that you can only control Olympian champions. So this is a very cleverly designed rank 3 card. It rewards you for staying an archetype, although it is so strong that, you know, it wants you to stay in the archetype to get the absolute most value out of this deck. This piece of support is crazy. So yeah, given that, you know, in order to deploy a lot of the better Olympian Mythics, you need to, you know, sacrifice or, you know, discard 4 Olympian champions from your hand or field. Having Mount Olympus makes the actual Mythic play of the deck not only extremely reasonable, but like kind of breakneck fast. So yeah, with Mount Olympus, the next one I want to mention here is Hermes. Hermes is a, I'm too lazy to pull it up here, but it's a rank 4, and when you deploy it, you can search your deck for any champion, add it into your hand, but it does cost you half your heartbeats. It's not Olympian specific, so you don't particularly need it for the Olympian archetype. It helps, fit that condition. You could search for it off of Mount Olympus, but, it's not particularly like an archetype necessary piece of support. And then finally, the big one I want to bring up is Gaia. It is one of the only rank 5s in the game, which means that only a few people in the world own it. And the card was kind of designed around knowing that only a few people ever own the card in the game. So obviously it's not particularly necessary for a strategy to go off, but as you can kind of see from the effect here, you need to sacrifice 2 Olympian Mythics from your field. It is just immune to all other card powers, and when it's deployed, it sends everything else to the grave. Opponents cannot react to it, and, it punches for 20,000 damage on its own. Usually by the time you can get this out, if you haven't already won by the time this thing hit the board in the first place, you absolutely win this turn. The card, honestly is kind of an unnecessary flex, but it is very funny. So yeah, a lot of the high rarity stuff other than Mount Olympus is kind of unnecessary to make the deck work, or it is going to be accessible in the battle deck. A lot of those, as I mentioned, are kind of, speed-oriented cards, but they do have a lot of other speed-oriented support here. So let's jump back to Ancient Legends so I can actually show you some of the tools that they've got. So one of those here, a really important piece of support here that a lot of people I think have been sleeping on, is Olympian Apollo. He's a 2-cost champion, very easy to get out on the board and, have AP left over. Whenever a champion you control is eliminated while this is on your field, you can deploy an Olympian champion from your grave. This works on your turn and on your opponent's turn. And, Olympians are pretty easy to get into the grave, all things considered. This becomes a key way to not only give yourself a bit of protection from cards getting eliminated, because an opponent's going to want to target this thing off the board first, but it even lets you kind of cheat things out really quick. Because if you have, a big cost Olympian in the grave, such as like Poseidon or Minotaur, you can, eliminate one of your own cards via some other card effect, trigger Apollo, and get that guy back out on the board. If that wasn't enough for you, there is also revival support built directly into the archetype with Rod of Asclepius. This just lets you deploy any Olympian champion from your grave. And this thing doesn't have a once per turn limitation. There are lots of extremely big champions in Olympians that are worth deploying. And, getting a lot of those out helps to quickly tear apart your opponent's board and, present an immediate win condition. And what would be this immediate win condition, you ask? Well, none other than one of those Olympian mythics. We have Hades. If I can find the card here. Yes, so Olympian Hades, Lord of the Underworld. You can equip champions from any player's grave up to the number of open magic fortifier slots that player has. Then Hades gains their combined attack. Well, with a bunch of extremely high-cost, high-attack Olympians in your grave, this thing can touch incredibly massive numbers on its own. If you thought that those numbers are a little bit too small, like, if you're not happy with only having, 25,000 attack on this, Olympian Persephone is a card that combines very well with this. Because not only is it, one of 4 Olympians that you maybe discard out of your hand to deploy Hades, but you can redeploy it back from the grave and then double the attack of that Hades or of any other Olympian champion or any other regular champion on your board. So yeah, Olympians, they have a strategy. That strategy results in extremely massive attacks against usually an unprotected board by the time you're torn it apart. It has a lot of consistency pieces, it has a lot of speed, it has a lot of searchers. So I believe that I am quite justified in saying that the Olympians are our second A-tier inclusion into the Mythic tier list here. I believe that, even though the Norse and the Olympians are both receiving battle decks that are both probably about the same level of power, I believe that full power Olympian beats full power Norse. That could be, a pretty hot take, but I am willing to, see the results on that. If somebody wants to take that, put that up to the challenge. I believe that, Olympians have what it takes to, generally be a stronger and more consistent deck than Norse. Because they don't have that downside of needing to, have their heartbeats and, be at extremely low heartbeats to do anything. They just have strong effects, and, dumping a bunch of things in the grave is not only not really much of a cost, it can be a benefit to this deck. So Olympians, A tier, pretty easily in my eyes. Next up is an archetype near and dear to my heart, the Parasites. Now, the Parasites are kind of weird. They've got 6 champions, a fortifier, and 3 magic cards. Now, I did mention rarities a little bit with Norse, but I didn't even really think about the Norse when I was mentioning the rarities here. The Parasites are the worst at, being able to build physically in cardboard due to the rarity problem here. So out of those, 10 total main deck cards in one Mythic, they have 4 cards at rank 3 or above, including the Mythic. It is a rank 3, and including the champions that you need to even deploy the Mythic in the first place, and also including their best archetype support for actually making the deck work. The Parasites are weird cards, but I love them here. Now, a lot of problems I mentioned with decks that are lower down in the tier list, like the Aztecs, like the Mermaiden, honestly, they don't even help the Mongols, because the Mongols are kind of incredibly xenophobic as an archetype. All their stuff is just Mongol-specific support. So they couldn't even get the benefits of Parasites. But how the Parasites work is you want to play them and have your opponents destroy them in combat. So let me go to a Parasite here. So let's go to, the Horn Parasite's a good one to show off here. So the Horn Parasite, all of the Parasite champions are cost 3, and, they have 0 stats, 0 attack, 0 defense. Whenever they are eliminated in battle by an opponent's champion, you eliminate the champion that eliminated them. And then you get an effect that directly pluses you in card advantage. For the Horn Parasite, it can deploy another copy of itself. For other ones, such as, let's say, the Yellow Parasite is a good one, if I can find that here. Yeah, so the Yellow Parasite's another very nice one here. That is, it's got the same 3 costs, the same 0 stats, the same whenever it's eliminated in battle by a champion, eliminate that champion, and then its negative effect is it forces an opponent to discard random cards, equals the number of yellow parasites in the grave, including itself. So the first one that goes down, it's a -2 for it. Well, you traded your parasite for 2 opponent's cards. The second one, you traded your parasite for 3 opponent cards. The third parasite, you're getting rid of 4 cards for 1 card. So the parasites alone are incredibly efficient at card advantage. So at the very least, they're not D tier. They have, a pretty cohesive strategy that makes them work. Do they have support though? Yes, actually. So they have some pretty incredible support. Parasite Mutation is a very good card for the parasites. Whenever a parasite champion you control is eliminated for any reason, you can add a parasite champion with a different name from your deck to your hand. So, you got, let's say that third yellow parasite, got rid of 4 of the opponent's cards for 1 of yours. Well, you can make up that loss by, getting another parasite out of your deck. So the opponent, instead of going -3 off that, they went -4 on that swing. The usual parasite hit, taking out 2 cards for 1, it's taking out 2 cards for none of your cards in the end. Just a small bit of AP loss. In addition, they also have, a card that lets them deploy stuff for free in Origin of Life to, just deploy a parasite face down. And they also have, fairly strong parasites themselves. And their win condition is, kind of where things fall apart. So with a bunch of 0 attack champions that don't really do damage to the opponent, they are kind of lacking a win condition. So this is kind of where the Mythik is supposed to come into play. You have to shuffle 5 different parasite champions from your grave to your deck to deploy it. It is immortal, so it can't be destroyed in combat, but it can be destroyed by other means. And whenever this card battles an opponent's champion, you can eliminate that champion, any champion physically next to it, and you can inflict damage to that champion equal to all the attack of the champions you eliminated. So, if this thing can, get on the board and swing, it can normally win pretty easily. But that runs into some problems here. You have to go through a lot of hoops to even get this thing deployed. If you're playing with, physical cardboard, you can't get 5 different champions without digging into a rank 3 or a rank 4. Be it either, the compelling parasite or the bleeding parasite. The bleeding parasite, the bleeding parasite is a rank 4, very hard to get out. Another one of the lower rarity ones, the delayed parasite, its shtick is actually, it'll equip itself once it's destroyed to your opponent's side of the board, and it'll bounce around their board, drain a tiny little bit of heartbeats, and drain some stats while it's there. But its thing is it never really hits your graveyard, ever. So even getting Variola out normally is close to impossible. Once you figure the fact that, opponents are able to interfere with your grave via mythics like Kaze Crawl, or, once they figure that, fortifiers exist, and the second you attack with Variola, it's getting blown up, yeah, you don't really have a way of actually winning with the parasite strategy. True, they are incredibly efficient. They are a great engine to splash into an existing deck, but as a strategy on their own capable of winning, they don't have it. They are, consistent, annoying enough. They do so well at all of the other parts of the game that I think the parasites fit squarely into C tier, but they don't really go above it, as an archetype on their own. as splash cards in a deck. You can get like, a 9-card core of, say, 3 horned, 3 yellow, 3, crowned, or, add some bleedings in if you own them to, start being efficient, to start tearing your opponent's deck apart. But, they don't have what it takes on their own to win. So I can't put them anywhere above C tier, despite the fact that they're like maybe a B tier in my heart. So, yep, that is where the parasites go. They do so much. Next up, if you watched the tournament play from last week, you got to see these guys up front and center, because I kind of built like I built a deck with a smorgasbord of archetypes. My deck was a smattering of Camelot, of Sengoku, and what ended up taking the show, because I kept drawing their cards all the time, are the Sea Devils. The Sea Devils are a new archetype that, is coming out this upcoming summer, early spring, late spring, early summer, in the Forbidden Tides archetype. The Sea Devils are fairly big. They've got 6 champions, 2 fortifiers, 2 generals, 2 magics, and 3 mythics. So they lose out a bit in size to, say, the Norse or the Olympians. But what they lose out for in size, they make up for in so many other ways. So, the Sea Devils' main strategy is to turn other cards into equipment that then becomes attached to your Sea Devils. The card that I'm going to show off here, the one that, had the most time on my board, is the Wide Galley. For a 6-cost champion, its stats are kinda low. 5,000, 2,000 is pretty weak. It's a card that I have some hesitation of ever deploying an attack stance, just because a decent mythic or a decent card is enough to just run over it in combat. But you can see kind of how the archetype works from just looking at this. Once per turn, you can spend some heartbeats, target a magic or a fortifier an opponent controls, and just turn it into equipment for your boat. So, by paying 2,000 heartbeats and deploying a fairly high cost, fairly low statted guy, you are directly removing an opponent's resource and turning it into something you can utilize, kind of. So, when you take cards like this, they aren't really deployable. I can't use your magic fortifier as my own. It's just sitting there as equipment, not really doing anything on my boat. It's kind of removal with a bit more steps, where, it could be clogging my board for better or for worse. Usually for better, because the Sea Devils do have ways of leveraging those cards. One of them comes up with an enduring fortifier that I never used, but will come up a lot, with actual Sea Devil play, the Spanish Armada. Each time an opponent declares an attack on you, you can sacrifice an equipped card to negate that attack and eliminate the attacking champion. So suddenly all that equipment that you stole that is not doing anything for you, it's now protecting you from attacks. You're getting some mileage out of it here. There are other cards that, play into this that make this deck a lot more, effective. So I had that Wide Galley out, and one of the big things with it was that, for a 6-cost card, it's kind of low stat. It doesn't feel like it's worth spending, 6 AP to deploy. But thankfully, a lot of the boats have captains. So Captain Bellamy here, he's a 4-cost, kind of low stats. 3,000 attack, it's fine for a 4-cost. It's, the attack's pretty high, the defense is not great, but, his thing is, when he's deployed, you can deploy Wide Galley from your hand or deck. So he immediately pluses you. And while he's face up on the field, your Wide Galley can't be eliminated. So suddenly that boat that you had problems, keeping in attack stance, you don't have to worry as much, because now the opponent, they had to go through your captain first in order to sink your boat, because we all know the captain goes down with the ship. So in order for, the ship to go down, the captain needs to go first. So very nice, very flavorful, and, for people looking at pieces of cardboard, very effective at, maintaining card efficiency. So we know that, they're at least C tier. Like, they have a strategy, it works, they've got speed. What do we think about power, though? Is just stealing a bunch of cards enough to win a game? Is that enough to, be a winning strategy? Well, kind of. So none of the Sea Devils actually have a lot going on in terms of like attack score. So Flying Dutchman, the Mythik, I never did get a chance to deploy it in my games here, but I had a lot of opportunities to. As long as you control a Sea Devil captain, like Bellamy, a Sea Devil champion with a different name, in instance Wida Galley, and an equipped card, you can just deploy this from your Mythic slot. It's 6,000 attack, 6,000 defense, and it allows you to equip a champion from any player's grave to a Sea Devil champion you control. So, it sits on the board, you can add more equipment, you can utilize that equipment with Sea Devil cards, with, deploying a 4-cost guy, you now have 3,000 attack, 5,000 attack, and 6,000 attack on the board. That makes, 13,000, pretty lucky, auspicious number, all things concerned. But is that enough to win the game? Well, again, kinda. Zhang Yisao, Admiral of 50,000, a very important card for the Sea Devil archetype, unfortunately limited by its rarity here. Because this is a card they want to max out the number of copies of. When this card is deployed, you can deploy a red flag fleet from your hand or deck for free. That is another 6-cost boat with fairly low stats. And once per turn, you can deploy one of your equipped champions to an open champion slot. So remember how I mentioned that the Flying Dutchman can equip a champion from any player's grave to the board? Well, Zhang Yisao turns that equipped champion into a deployed champion. So now, within the archetype, there aren't a lot of cards to get in the grave, but the opponent probably has a lot of cards that are being sent to the grave. So, yeah, the amount of small bodies that you could spam out pretty much immediately with the deck makes it very strong. The power is not enough to make it S tier. Like I explained, the speeds, this thing is, deck speed pretty similar to the Camelot, and honestly, the general power pretty similar to Camelot. Its ability to deny the opponent resources is incredibly good, and it forces the opponent on a defensive foot. It's also got built-in protection between a lot of fortifiers and stuff. I showed you the fact that the champions can, the captains can search the boats, but you also have in-archetype searching as well. And I didn't mean to, go delete things here and go right on the stuff. Let's go, not save that and reopen this here. There we go. Yeah, for Jolly Roger, the Pirate's Insignia here, this magic card got a lot of mileage in my play. It just lets you search any Sea Devil champion or general and add it to your hand. So yeah, it's got the consistency, it's got the searcher, it's got protections, it's got speed, it's got power. None of that is enough to immediately win the game, and honestly, without either the opponent having the right cards in the grave, or without running other strategies on the side of Sea Devils, they don't have what it takes to be S for Sea Devil tier, unfortunately. But they are an incredibly solid addition to the A tier list. If you're playing straight Sea Devils, I expect it to be an incredibly powerful, incredibly meta deck, but they don't quite have that oomph to just straight up, punch for game. But they do have a lot of incredibly powerful cards. I'm looking forward to playing them. I'm looking forward to see how other people play them as well. Alright, I'm going to take a little break here to grab it. Well, not much of a break, just I'm taking a drink. Give me a break. Alright, got a tiny bit of the whiskey and Coke left. Next up, let's go to one of my favorite OG archetypes here, the Sengoku. Now, I mentioned the Sengoku a little earlier into this, along with the Iga. As I mentioned before, the Sengoku is kind of a smorgasbord of 3 related archetypes, those being the Iga, the Kami, and the Sengoku. The Kami are exclusively the mythics that you deploy by the Sengoku, other than the Iga mythic, which I mentioned before, and then the Iga is kind of like, an add-on, like, DLC for the Sengoku, if you wish to, download and utilize it and see what additional things it gives you. But how do the Sengoku play straight up just as an archetype? Well, with being one of the older archetypes, it has 9 champions, 1 fortifier, 3 generals, 2 magics, and I have put this in asterisk here, but 1 mythic, because the only Sengoku mythic is technically the Sengoku Iga one that you need to be playing the Iga cards to benefit from. I also put 3 mythics as a second star for it, because the Kami are exclusively the Sengoku mythics that you deploy by being solely in the Sengoku archetype, or at least, having the right Sengoku cards to use them. I do definitely like those points, Jonesy, about the, about the Sea Devils. Being able to steal opponents' cards is an incredibly powerful form of removal. A lot of the, defense against, removal is particularly like, what I showed with the Sea Devil captains, it prevents your cards from being eliminated. A lot of protection in the game is protection against being eliminated. There are very few things that, can handle removal that isn't elimination. So there are some cards that, equip cards to your board, largely with the Sengoku. There are ones that return them to the hand. And, as the game develops, there may be even more ways of removing cards from the board that isn't specifically, a targeted elimination. But just removing cards, as with the parasites, isn't enough to, win the game. You do actually need to be able to punch for lethal and not present a board that, can't be dismantled or punched through by itself. The Sea Devils may have a great turn, like, say, Sea Devil versus Camelot. Camelot goes first. They play some mounted defense, maybe a fortifier or 2. They pass to the Sea Devil. The Sea Devil might, blow up or steal both of the back row. They might deal with the champion on board, but they alone can't punch for lethal. Camelot, at that point, can punch for lethal in most cases by that point. So yeah, I mean, I feel like putting them in S tier just because I like them a lot, but I can tell that they were pretty smartly designed. They were intentionally built to be low in power, and the Sea Devils, even though they have a lot of cards that fix their consistency, you can't help the fact that, sometimes you'll draw an opening hand, and it'll end up being, 3 boats and no captains. Because, the more the boats have the really cool effects, And the way that you're going to benefit from having those cool effects is by having more boats in your deck, but the more boats you have in your deck, the more boats you'll have in your opening hand. So that's kind of like why my strategy of, having a minimal Sea Devil core with just the Bellamy's, just 2 Wide Galleys, and just the Searchers worked out so well for me, because I got to minimize the number of bad opening hands I got by, going fully into the Sea Devil strategy, while still, having one of the stronger cards in there that, I had access to. So that's why I'm not quite putting them in S tier myself. I don't think they are so strong that you have to specifically assume that your opponent is using them and strategize specifically against them. You do need to be wary of them. But as far as, like, playstyle, it's a little rough. I do feel that, just as the Camelot could easily eke themselves into S tier if they get, like, a few champions with higher attack, I feel like the Sea Devils could get there, if they could, fix their bad opening hands a little bit more effectively, and if they also got higher attack champions. But right now, I think they both are just... They're cleverly designed. They're just at that point where they fall a little short of being so overwhelmingly powerful that you need to specifically run play counter to them in particular. But yes, away from pirates back to samurai. The Sengoku. I did mention that they have, a decent number of cards to them. But, it's an old archetype. Sometimes the old archetypes were a little clunky. How do they play out? Well, the Sengoku, they have an incredibly efficient resource loop focused around, around their generals here. So the best card to explain kind of what the Sengoku were able to do is, the cornerstone card of the Sengoku strategy, the Sengoku Shogun, Tokugawa Ieyasu. He does show as a rarity 3 here, but he got an extremely helpful reprint in Forbidden Tides that makes him a rarity 2, making him extremely approachable for, players wanting to build Sengoku and play it properly. And this was a very wise reprint and rarity reduction, because this is a card that absolutely needs to be in a Sengoku strategy in order for it to do its thing. This card's effect is threefold here. When he's deployed, he lets you search for any Sengoku card in your deck and add it to your hand. You generally want to use him to search the magic card that lets you search for a champion, but not always. His next effect is the first time a Sengoku champion you control would be eliminated, you can protect it from elimination. Again, it's elimination protection. The most common type of, card protection you're going to see on something, prevent it from being eliminated, is pretty standard. And then finally, one of the big ones here, all of your Sengoku champs can attack in defense stance and use their defense stat for damage calculation. So a lot of the Sengoku champions are pretty low in attack, but pretty high in defense. So being able to, attack with them in defense stance, very good. This is a card that you absolutely want to see in your opening hand. But how that deck works then is you generally want to search for what I said is the magic card here. Very good support, very helpful one to have printed for any sort of deck. This one is sadly Sengoku limited, but, since I'm talking about the Sengoku, it's all fine. If you control a Sengoku champion, you can add a Sengoku general from your deck to your hand, or if you control a Sengoku general, you can add a Sengoku champion from your deck to your hand. So, instead of having the general directly search for the champion, you can search for a magic, and then search for that champion by deploying the magic. But Raxi, you just wasted a card. Why would you do that when you could just search for the champion directly? Well, first off, you're thinning the deck. you're thinning it of a searcher, which, could be a concern because, you're getting rid of a searcher. You might have needed that later to, search for something else. But you are also adding a magic card to your graveyard, which is very important once I mention not the next card, but the second next card I'm going to talk about here. Because the next card I'm going to mention is, one of the best supporting champions I've seen for an archetype. It is Sengoku Samurai Imagawa Yoshimoto. He's a 4-cost champion, so you can easily just, deploy him from your hand if he's there. But whenever he's deployed, you can sacrifice any number of champions from your field, not including himself, unlike that Pegasus card that people like. But you can sacrifice any number of champions from your field to deploy a Sengoku champion from your hand or deck, whose level is less than or equal to the combined level of the sacrificed champions, +2. So with this guy, you get him, use your general or your tea ceremony to search him, and then you play him, and he gives you a lot of things you can do. He is also like the highest attack stat for a level 4 champ. If you care about that, you might not necessarily, care for that because, sacrificing him off to deploy a cost 5 or cost 6 is normally the best play with him. But he gives you a lot of options. And now it's time to mention that second next card, which goes also into the mythics here as well. So one of these here is Takeda Shingen, Sengoku Samurai. When he is deployed, you can target a champion on any player's field, which can include himself because he is on the field. He has been deployed. And that target is now unaffected by magic cards until this card leaves the field. So, that it does include your own magic cards, it includes the opponent's magic cards. It's a very nice card. He can target himself, generally a solid idea. He doesn't have to, though, if you want to, protect something bigger or, more frail instead. So this here is a very solid protection here. So if you were worried about, having your stuff stolen by, say, a pirate plunder from the Sea Devil archetype, Takeda Shingen protects against that. Now, he can't protect against champion powers or fortifiers, but there is a Sengoku Samurai Uesugi Kenshin, also a 6 cost, 4,000, 5,000 stats, that protects against fortifiers. So I want you to remember the names Takeda Shingen and Uesugi Kenshin, because now I've got to mention those mythics, the kami. Because, they are, unofficially part of the Sengoku archetype, despite not being part of them. Because these are cards that you're generally running with them if you're actually playing the Sengoku cards. So, Divine Kami Ryujin, this is the one that, is tied to the Fortifier guy. You deploy the mythics by, shuffling that 6-cost guy and 4 fortifiers or magics from your field or grave into your deck. For Ryujin here, you shuffle fortifiers. For Take Minakata, you shuffle in, Takeda Shingen and your 4 magic cards. And what these guys do is they're like an anthem protection for all of your champions against, either fortifiers or magic based on the, the kami you've got out. And during any player's turn, at any time, you can return this card from your field or grave, put it back into the mythic slot, and you can, give your champions, or even an ally's champions, protection from fortifiers until the start of your next turn. Very cool, very helpful effect. But why that comes into play is the, the final boss of the Sengoku ones, which was, considered a kami later on, Amaterasu. So what you have to do is you shuffle all of your non-mythic champions, and you have to have Take Minakata and Ryujin, the 2 mythics, either in your field or in your grave. You have to shuffle in at least 4 non-mythic champions. from either field or grave, but, having them in the grave is pretty easy. And while this is on the field, it negates all opponents' mythics and generals, and it cannot be eliminated in battle by mythics. In addition, its stats are kind of crazy high. It's an incredibly powerful end board piece for the deck here. But this isn't usually the one that you see, because I'm talking about the Sengoku and not the Kami. But I'm giving you some context for, what the Sengoku were supposed to do. What you realistically do with the Sengoku, however, is a lot different. Because the Sengoku are extremely fast and extremely quick. Yeah, those are the same word. At deploying very large guys from your grave. One of the most important cards here is Sengoku Retainer. So he is a 3-cost. He has, some elimination protection stapled to him, like a few cards in the archetype already. You can also sacrifice him to deploy any Sengoku champion from your grave. So I mentioned that there's some high 6-cost guys. There's also a 5-cost guy that you could tribute off whenever to eliminate an opponent's general. Very rare, very powerful effect. But no, the best one that you want to bring out with him is Miyamoto Musashi. He's a 10-cost, 10,000 attack, and he has a very nasty effect stapled to him. Once per turn, he can just eliminate an opponent's champion. Once he does that, he can't attack directly, but, usually by the point you're deploying him, he, is already doing a very good job of tearing apart the opponent's board, attacking maybe a weaker champion in attack stance, and you've already at that point put enough other champions on the board, just due to how the Sengoku work, between, being able to, play stuff just by having enough things in the grave, that you're generally able to push to a very quick win. The Sengoku, they are an archetype that I had very little qualms about throwing directly into A tier here. They are pretty strong indeed. They're not broken by any means. Like, you can't form a board normally quickly enough to, get those out. You can get Takemi Nakata out pretty quickly. Like, it's not hard to go through 4 magic cards, especially following my guidance and using the general to search Tea Ceremony, and then using Tea Ceremony to search a champion. Because that's already one. It's not much harder to, find and deploy 3 other magics to get Takemi Nakata out. But, the Sengoku, they hit hard, they hit fast, they have a lot of good recursion between, Onabushi getting the generals back if they get eliminated for any reason, between Retainer, fishing your extremely high-powered champions out of the grave, between all the searchers, all the acceleration. With everything they've got, I believe they're quite deserving of A tier here. So as I mentioned before with the Iga, I think that if you go Sengoku Iga, I think it's like A.5 or tier 1.5. I think Iga's dragging it down just a tiny bit. But the Iga, they were built to be in the shadow of the Sengoku, both lore-wise as well as, by card design. So yeah, you are dealing with slightly substandard cards in, like Agent and Sabotage and Shuriken, instead of running, better cards. But, those Iga cards are, kind of at the same time, they are, they are cards that count toward the getting the Kami out. They are cards, especially Smokescreen, that protect your Sengoku on the board, as if they didn't have enough protection already. And they play with it pretty well. So, in fact, Ren piloted a very strong Sengoku Iga list. I think still, tier 1.5 is very good for it, though. I think that, dropping the Iga and using that space instead to build other things is quite competitive, But, saying tier 1.5 doesn't really mean anything when you're this close. Like, I think, just the fact that you have some substandard cards in the deck is the only real detriment. They play around well enough with the Sengoku archetype where you're not losing much by, going Sengoku Iga, like the designers probably intended. But I think you could be a little bit spicy and maybe splash Sengoku with something else, and be just a little bit stronger than, the design of Sengoku Iga. Alright, next up here, this is the other victim to the high rarity price tag here. We have the Shadow Prince archetype here. The Shadow Prince is the, what do I call these guys? The symmetrical damage sort of guys here. A lot of the Shadow Princes are extremely negative effects for both players, stapled to extremely large bodies. The Shadow Princes, they, let's see, so for the Shadow Prince archetype, they've got 9 champions, a fortifier, 1 general, and 6 magic cards. So that they've got absolutely enough cards to, run a solid Shadow Prince deck with. They can be a little bit splashable if you want to, include a specific effect on a high-cost guy. But the problem is, since they're all high-cost guys, you need to either wait several turns to deploy them fairly, or have some way of cheating them out of the graveyard, as with, Chang'e from an archetype that has only two mythics in it. But yeah, if you have a way of, cheating a big guy out pretty quick, then, the Shadow Princes can be a fun inclusion in any deck you are running. Okay, yeah, Hate Bears, that was a, that is absolutely, Magic the Gathering terminology, except, instead of with a bear in Magic the Gathering, I do remember this. I did play Magic, I'm not going to say up till 2012, because I honestly did not play the game much at all, but I played it back in 2012. And a bear is a 2 attack, 2 defense creature. So weak compared to our 10,000 attacks in Mythic. But, a 2/2 is, roughly equivalent to, our, say, 3,000, 3,000. They're, general low-cost champions that require a fairly minimal amount of mana to deploy in Magic. So a Hate Bear is, a small creature tied with a pretty negative effect for, both players on it. But, through the power of symmetrical effects, you just design your deck in a way where you don't care about the downside, and your opponent does. So doing things like that, makes the deck extremely oppressive for the opponent, while you get to laugh in your face because you get to dodge all of the negative consequences. One of the best cards to demonstrate that here is with a very hard card to get, Shadow Prince Abaddon the Loafer. This is a rank 4, so, out of maybe several boxes of Ancient Legends, you might have a chance of pulling one of the many rank 4s in there, and one of those could be Abaddon the Loafer. Now, thankfully, with the Forbidden Tides release upcoming, we are going to see reprints of a lot of the Shadow Princes. Abaddon, I believe, is not one of the ones getting a reprint, though. So you need to, be extremely lucky to get this guy, just because his effect is that overwhelmingly oppressive. While he's on the field, players are not allowed to use any more than 4 action points per turn. So if the opponent was saving up for their own 8 cost to, walk over your Abaddon, they're not able to do that. They can only deploy weak guys now that probably can't deal with, this, monstrosity of a card on the board. You'd be like, Raxi, well, you said this deck is all high-cost guys. Isn't this just shooting yourself in the foot? What did you say about symmetrical effects? Well, the Shadow Princes don't particularly care. about, actually spending their hard-earned AP to deploy cards because they just cheat them out. So, Gates of Hell is an enduring card. Any Shadow Prince champion in your hand, you can deploy it from your hand or grave by sacrificing Shadow Princes from your hand or field whose combined level meets or exceeds that champion. So you can get rid of a big guy out of your hand and just dump another big guy onto the board for free. Now, that's not particularly efficient in terms of, like, card resources, but, being able to quickly get out an extremely oppressive card on your turn 1, potentially even before the opponent has a chance to play a card, you can see where with cards like Abaddon that becomes incredibly oppressive. In addition, they have more tools open to them as well. Let's see, the next one I wanted to show here, because none of these are in alphabetical order, of course. Can't have things be easy for the streamer guy. Not Trebuchet, not Battering Ram. Come on, where are you? Okay, let's just stick the cards that are actually called Shadow Prince here. So they have other cards that, kind of help them regain card advantage. I did actually pull this on a stream a little while ago, but Beelzebub the Jealous, another rank 4. He's the only cheap Shadow Prince in the entire archetype. You have the deployment attack stance, which is kind of rough. But once you do, you can just add any Shadow Prince card from your deck to your hand. That includes, champions, that includes their magics, that includes that fortifier if you want, and that does include their general as well. And their general is, particularly rough, as what he does is, he negates all other generals on the field. They can't use their effects, they have no powers. So yeah, that generally is enough to, disable an opponent's strategy, particularly if they care a lot about their general. So I've got Arthur off to the side. I mentioned how important the general is for the Sengoku, and I didn't particularly mention how important it is for the Sea Doubles, but their generals are quite good as well. In fact, a lot of the top decks usually have pretty good generals attached to them, and Lucifer negates those. And even better, Lucifer's kinda generic. You don't need to have him in a Shadow Prince deck. You can throw him in anything you want, and he will be just as oppressive in that deck as he will in any other deck. So yeah, just having lots of incredibly oppressive effects, pretty quick ways of getting these cards out. The deck is quite strong. But I do have to mention that cost just due to how difficult it is to get these guys out. So for instance, Rebellion of the Angels is the other card I was looking for. It's just a one-time use. Deploy any Shadow Prince from your hand to the board with no cost. So again, Shadow Princes don't care about their massive AP costs. They can just get dumped on the board for free. And a lot of them have incredibly powerful effects that, can just make the game pretty unwinnable for the opponent or outright win the game by themselves. So Leviathan kind of acts as protection. If a player activates any card power, you can change the card target to this card here. So, if an opponent's trying to, go remove something else, you can try to have it remove Leviathan instead, and it can't be eliminated. So it negates a lot of elimination effects. Let's see if I can pull up Sathanas here. Sathanas the Furious. Very nice card, as it can attack every champion a single opponent controls. And it's unaffected by champion powers. So if they got a few guys in attack stance, you can immediately probably do enough damage to get them close to lethal, if not kill them outright. So where do I put these guys on the board? Well, I mentioned that, they have very strong effects. I mentioned that they do have a little bit of protection. I mentioned that I have a lot of ways of quickly getting them onto the board. but they don't really have a lot of protection. Like, the opponent has to pick and choose whether or not they want to protect a fairly weak board or to, present a strong board with risks. And they have to contend with your fortifiers that, destroy things when they're attacked, because they can't really stop a lot of those. They can't stop a lot of your removal. They, if you have the defense, they can't do a lot about that. And, if they can't get their cards and allow them to deploy their hand for free, you're kind of bricked, just hoping, Nessie Pass is good enough. I believe that if you put a Shadow Prince deck up against any of the A tiers on this list, I'm going to say that, 6 times out of 10, maybe 7 times out of 10, it'll probably lose. Just because, the deck is notoriously hard to pilot. You have to take a lot of risks for it in order to get the rewards. And a lot of the good decks, they don't particularly care about a lot of the restrictions here. So, like I mentioned, how strong Abaddon is about, being able to prevent your opponent from spending more than 4 AP. But Camelot doesn't need to spend 4 AP. The Olympians revive a lot of the guys from the grave. That doesn't cost AP. The Sea Devils, you're hopefully never spending more than 4 AP to deploy your boats on the field. And the Sengoku, I mean, a lot of their play is, reviving guys from the graveyard, or, sacrificing your 4 AP guy to cheat 6 AP guys out to then cheat Mythics out. So a lot of the, the floodgates that might stop things aren't necessarily stopping a lot of, incredibly smart play. And in fact, a lot of the one of the more oppressive ones here, I think, is is it Belial, perhaps? No, Belial's copying, which is cool, not really an oppressive effect. What is the one I am looking for? It might be Belphegor. Okay, yeah, Belphegor is a really good one here. Probably one of the best floodgates here. Preventing an opponent from, activating or deploying more than one magic or fortifier per turn. So, like on the turn, if an opponent has 2 face downs and they deploy one of them, they can't deploy that second one to stop a second attack. If an opponent deployed 1 magic, they can't deploy a second magic. And you can deploy this, after you do all of your magics for the turn, so it doesn't affect you as much. But, a lot of these decks, I didn't mention that they have to use a lot of magics. The Camelot strategy took no magic to do. You might deploy, Avalon or Camelot on your turn to either protect your board or get those double attacks in. For the Olympians, you might be using Mount Olympus once, or you might be deploying your Rod of Asclepius on a turn, but you rarely need to use both. The Sea Devils, you're probably deploying your Jolly Roger, but that's really it. And the Sengoku, you're probably deploying your Tea Ceremony, but that's really it. It's, hampering a lot of, out of archetype, deployments of, say, Trebuchet or the Yokai Magic cards or some other fun ones. But, that's kind of getting in your way as well. It's not doing a lot to stop the archetypes themselves. And yeah, Jonesy, you did mention a really good point on Shadow Prince. They did get a recent bit of support in, Twilight Immortal. Fires of Hell, very fun card. And what that lets you do is, as long as you control a, what was it? Yeah, as long as you control a Shadow Prince, then you can damage all other players on the board that don't have a Shadow Prince equal to the attack of that Shadow Prince. So yeah, that can quickly lead to OTK scenarios. But yeah, you have to have the right cards on the board to do that. It is quite strong. But I think between the consistency and I'm not going to count the rarity on this here. I'm tempted to go A.5 on this. Do I think it's better than the Norse? Do I think it's better than the Heavenly? I absolutely think it's better than the Gaelic. I absolutely think it's better than the Iga. Do I think it stacks up with the Sengoku? Do I think it stacks up with the Olympians, with the Sea Devils, with the Camelot? Possibly. It's just, if you don't have the right hand, you are screwed. They don't have a lot of stuff to fix their consistency. They have cards that make it easier to deploy the things in your hand, but they lack the things to search it. Their searcher is deploying Abaddon in attack stance, and that's what they've got. And if they are stuck revolving on that to, search for things, I'm going to say that, they can't compete with the big dogs in A tier. So I am putting the Shadow Princes, quite firmly as a very strong B tier. Because, of course, after this, I've got to, resort these guys, like, how good are they in the tier? How much do they deserve to move up or down? But, yeah, I'm putting them in B tier here. Next up, the SPQR, our People of Rome. This one, it's an old archetype. They have a lot of cards. They have enough to physically assemble a cardboard deck of solely SPQR cards. They've got 7 champions, 4 fortifiers, 7 generals. I need to pause on that. 7 generals. And 2 magics. But again, 7 generals. You would be surprised, but, the deck, despite having this many cards, and despite being in an old set, they have very few cards that are rarity gated 2, 3, and above. They've got 2 of their generals, 1 of their magics, and 1 of their champions gated behind high rarity. Unfortunately, one of those is All Roads Lead to Rome. If I can find that card, will it appear on my list, or did it not exist in this download? It did not exist in the download. How sad. Actually, no, there it is. I see it. I just can't spell. Okay, there we go. So All Roads Lead to Rome. So this is the General Searcher. If for some reason having 2 copies of 7 generals in a deck wasn't enough to get a specific general, All Roads Lead to Rome is the Searcher for it. Frankly, this is a card that should have been a 2, given, how core generals are to the idea of Rome itself. The other card that I find it unfortunate that it's there, and is also a good idea to show, just to show you kind of the problems of the deck itself, is the SPQR. Praetorian Guard. So this card here is a 9 cost. Very low stats on it for a 9 cost, with only 1,000 attack and 8,000 defense. You will pretty much never put this thing in attack stance if you ever deploy it. You can see that its effect here once per turn. You could sacrifice your general and deploy a general directly from your deck. Playing into the, having a ton of generals and Rome's idea of, getting rid of their leadership every few years because they didn't like taxes or something. But this card kind of illustrates another problem with the SPQR. Their cards are weak. They are incredibly, pathetically, pitifully weak. They have so many problems going on with them here. And spending 9 AP to deploy this guy fairly is kind of wild in any world. So, thankfully, this card does have a card to cheat it out a little bit faster. SPQR Civil War. So, in order to cheat that card out, with how strong that card is, you'd think that it'd just be like a freebie, but no, it's tied to a fortifier that requires you to take at least 5,000 damage in a turn. Deploy that from your hand or deck. So thankfully you don't have to spend 9 AP to deploy that card, but you know, in general, it's not a good card, and the card to deploy it isn't even that good. After going from the Sea Devils to this, you can see how the game has improved. You know, just looking at those. Now, the SPQR, again, they are very general heavy. So you would hope that their generals are good, and I think I'm showing their currently best general on here, the Empress Agrippina. Once per turn, you can target and eliminate a card on your field, except the Empress, to eliminate that same type of card on an opponent's field. So it's a symmetrical effect. It's, you know, for symmetrical effects, it's pretty strong. Like, you know, you can just eliminate a weak card that you don't care about to eliminate a strong card that the opponent definitely cares about. It's a strong card overall, but you can see that it's not really getting you anything in terms of advantage here. Another one here, let's click on Marcus Aurelius. So while he's on the field, the first time an SPQR champion to be eliminated, it's not. That only goes off once. So once he's done his one elimination protection, he's done. For a general, you might remember the same effects, because it's the same one bolted to the Sengoku general Tokugawa Ieyasu, who also searches you a card for free, and also lets all your guys attack and defense stance. Compared to that, Marcus Aurelius is kind of incredibly weak. Another one here, Kaiser Augustus. He's one of the few rank 3s. For a rank 3, you know, you'd hope he'd be pretty strong, and he is actually adding you a free card. He's getting you any SPQR magic or fortifier from your deck to your hand. SPQR does have some kinda decent magics on it. SPQR Ballista is a pretty good one for destroying a single attack stance champion. Very good, solid one to have. And while he's on the field, your face-down magic and fortifiers can't be targeted by card powers here. So this is actually one of the few cards that stops the Sea Devil strategy, which is pretty cool. So yeah, if you're scared about White Galley taking all of your fortifiers, just have Kaiser on the board, and you know the opponent can't do that. Unfortunately, he is a rarity 3 in a set with 30 different rarity 3s to pull from, and only getting to a box. Good luck, is what I've got to say to that here. I haven't really gone over a winning strategy in this, because they don't have one. I'm going to pull up some random champions here. So, you know, he's got, you know, this guy searches Legion. Legion, I believe, is the main champion in this deck, the thing that everything revolves around, and probably the best champion in the deck here. So let me pull up the SPQR Legion. Well, technically, it's the second best SPQR champion. I can actually tell you the best one, but he's not actually really SPQR related here. But we've got Legion. His stat line for a for a level 4 is incredible. 3,000 attack is, you know, among the higher, and 6,000 defense is the highest stat number bolted to any level 4 in the game. He also searches you a free Ballista, you know, the magic that destroys an attack stance champion, of which, you know, that's going to come up pretty often here. But the best champion here, I did want to mention this here, it's a card that, you know, only exists in the OG Olympian deck, as well as in the Dawn of Mythic, like, pre-printing of Ancient Legends. We've got the Syrian Archer here. Fairly mid stats for a level 4. It discards random cards at the opponent's hand every turn, an incredibly powerful effect. But you'll notice that none of these effects actually allow the SPQR to win. In fact, the SPQR is kind of not really an archetype. Like, yeah, there are enough cards. You can have all the SPQR cards in a name to build a deck that can potentially play the game of Mythic. But there is no actual winning strategy behind them. And you might memorize this from my talk about Genghis Khan, where Genghis Khan, doesn't really have much of a strategy to win the game, and what he does has is incredibly weak. The SPQR, they don't even have a cohesive strategy. They just have a lot of assorted guys that, have effects on them that are, varying degrees of utility. But as far as like a cohesive archetype strategy for an archetype tier list, they fail to get out of D tier. So they are going to be the second D tier addition to the archetype list. I'm noting here that we kind of have, something of like a bell curve a little bit, which is kind of nice. But we'll see how the Three Kingdoms stacks up here to see if we've got, either a really good archetype looking at us here, or, something that's going to go in B or maybe even C tier. It could also be our first S tier. So, the Three Kingdoms. This is an archetype near and dear to one of our designer's hearts. His name, he goes by Lubu. Lubu is the card that, I'm using to represent the archetype here, even though he's probably not the best representative of it. He's kind of a fun card, though, that, shows off what the archetype can potentially do. Three Kingdoms is the most supported archetype in the game. It has 16 champions, the highest number of mentions so far of any card in any archetype. But I'm not done yet. It's got 5 fortifiers, 3 generals, 17 magic cards, and then finally 2 mythics. So yeah, we are looking at an archetype with, I think, just over 40 cards in it. They are impressively well supported. Not only can you make a deck entirely of Three Kingdoms cards, you can make several decks with individual playstyles out of Three Kingdoms cards here. One of those strategies is, I think, better than the others, and that's going to be the one that I talk about here. But just to let you know what the Three Kingdoms is capable of, they have enough individual cards to almost make like a deck of just like a Highlander deck. They fall just shy of like 40 card Highlander because 2 of their cards are mythics. But, if they get more support in the future, then, they are going to be in a very good place. But we'll see where they are now, because I'm going to talk about what they can do. Because, they have 40 cards, maybe a lot of them are kind of rough. And, honestly, they do have some pretty rough cards. When you have 40 cards, some of them, don't particularly do a lot. So, like, Cow Cow's Whip here, you have to have a Three Kingdoms champion on your field. You can target an opponent's champion, and it'll lose half of its stats for the rest of the turn. Like, remember when I mentioned that, Iga Sabotage, when Iga Agent wasn't that great of a card because it's a fortifier that just reduces half attack and defense for a turn? This card's, that on a magic that takes a bit of conditions to pull off. So yeah, absolutely there's some cards that are, a little less than stellar in the archetype here. But they're not particularly representative of the archetype here. Because I need to mention, what the strategy of the deck is here. And I think the best card to, demonstrate the strategy is one of their generals here. So let me navigate to this guy here. Emperor Liu Bei the Benevolent. So this is one of the 3 generals, Three Kingdoms, they were, historically being ruled by all sorts of people, just an absolute circus of people going in and out. Emperors getting assassinated and betrayed left and right. Liu Bei is one of the three that's being represented here. What he does is whenever he and a Three Kingdoms champion are on the field, you can deploy a Tiger Three Kingdoms champion from your hand without cost. So what are the Tigers? Are they good? Because obviously he's letting you bring out some fairly scary cards. But is that enough? Is that enough speed to win the game? Well, the next card I'm going to show you here is a card that, kind of explains a bit more of, some of the power and, some of the resilience that the deck has. So let me find... I've got to find the alphabet here, because since this archetype was built after archetyping was built in, they don't have to name all these cards Three Kingdom, Lu Bu, the Flying Tiger here. Instead, we can get, just Ma Chao, the Splendid Tiger of the Three Kingdoms archetype here. So you can see here that this guy is a high cost, high statted guy. 7 cost, 7,000 attack, 7,000 defense. Very solid stat line. And once per turn, you can target a champion on your opponent's field and return it to their hand. So this is one of the few cards that I've kind of alluded to when I've talked about, most cards dealing with elimination protection. There is basically nothing that stops this type of removal that forces things back into an opponent's hand. It's not incredibly strong because, that opponent might be able to just deploy that next turn. But if you're trying to go for, a killing blow, Ma Chao opens up so many holes in an opponent's field. But yeah, he's high level, he's high statted, but he's not particularly punching for games on its own. So the next card I want to mention here, because a lot of these cards, that I've brought up so far, the first two, is, they've all had this, annoying little rider of they want a Three Kingdoms champion on the board. So there is a card that, benefits very highly from having 2 champions on the board. Peach Garden Oath. This is a magic card that's actually not Three Kingdoms specific. So if you just want to splash this into any of your other decks, up their power a little bit, and maybe make, Camelot be an OTK, then, keep Peach Garden Oath in mind. Target 2 champions on your field. The first champion gains attack equal to the second champion's attack until the end of turn. You can only use this power once per turn. So yeah, if you've got Ma Chao and something else on the board, you could add, something's attack to that 7,000 or add that 7,000 attack to maybe something a little bit weaker to, maybe punch a larger hole in an opponent's board. But that's still not quite punching for lethal. I've only shown, a champion. Well, there's some pretty scary champions out there with very high attack. One of them is Lu Bu, of course. Lu Bu has 12,000 attack. He's not a tiger, so you can't deploy him with the general. But he does have a specific searcher that, deploys him for free. And yeah, 12,000 attack and attacking twice is usually enough to end a game on its own. Not quite. It's a little bit short on attack, but that doesn't really matter. But no, I want to talk about what's available in the Tigers. And with the Tigers, there is none other than Shangfei, the Drunken Tiger. He's a 9 cost, 9,000 attack, 0 defense, so a permanent attacker. And he can double his attack for a turn. But then after that, he loses, his attack gets reset and then halved until the start of your next turn. So you can turn him into an 18,000 attack beater. But afterwards, he goes down to 4,500 until the end of turn. So I mentioned, Ma Chao earlier deliberately, because he's 7,000. And, this guy's 18,000. The mathematicians among us might be able to add 7,000 to 18,000 and think of a specific number that might be. If you are a little bit slow or a little bit distracted with this Yungu spawn, then you might not have come to that number right away, but that does add up to exactly 25,000 heartbeats. Unfortunately, however, that Liu Bei general, that power only works once a turn to deploy a free guy. How do I get 2 of those out? Well, now I get to mention the most important cornerstone card of the entire archetype, Sun Ren, Queen of Mountains and Rivers. Charmingly misspelled in the original print, reprinted and fixed in Forbidden Tides to, have a proper mountains spelling on it here, but it's always funny to mention. This card here, it's like the primary one you want to deploy on a turn. She adds a general from your deck to your hand, so immediately earning yourself back in card advantage. And while you control a 3 Kingdoms general, which is quite easy because you just grabbed one, you could sacrifice a water or a fire type 3 Kingdoms champion to deploy a 3 Kingdoms champion of the opposite type from your hand. Well, she counts as both water and fire, so she can treat herself as water to deploy a fire from your hand. And all of the tiger champions that go with Liu Bei are conveniently of the fire type. So if you have Sun Ren and, say, Peach Garden Oath in hand and a single tiger, or 2 tigers rather, you can, use Sun Ren to search for, the general, play the general, use the general to deploy a free tiger from your hand, and then use Sun Ren, sacrifice her off to deploy the second tiger from your hand. So kind of, if you could build your own hand, you could build your own OTKs. Thank you for the hydrate. I am actually just about out of this Coke and whiskey. So I've got to go to water now. Thank you, Vita. I appreciate it so much. All right, so yeah. Sun Ren builds your own OTKs, but Raxi, if you could just construct your own hand, you could build OTKs out of anything. Why is this archetype different? Well, there are a lot of tigers, a lot of them have very strong attacks, and, you don't have the necessarily OTK. You can just put out an extremely strong board presence. You can leave Sun Ren on the field and just, keep deploying free tigers every turn. And, there are cards to, search things. There are champions like Shen Yu, the strategist, I believe. No, Shen Yu the Brilliant. I can't find him because I can't read. But yeah, Shen Yu the Brilliant, when it's deployed, not an attack stance, you don't have to do it like like Beelzebub. But yeah, you can just search for any champion. So if you don't have Sun Ren, you could search for her. If you have Sun Ren and want to start planning that OTK at any point, you can go and add that champion to your hand. In addition, you don't necessarily have to do that, and you don't necessarily have to focus on, okay, Vita is going to drown me. I will hydrate one more time. And then I will ignore phone for a few minutes while I look back at card lists because I can't read cards. Excellent here. So yeah, so you have a lot of high-cost guys that you're deploying with Liu Bei. You have other generals as well that work with him quite well. So another one, that deals with the fact that you have high-cost guys is Sun Quan the Pragmatic. Because as long as you got another 3 Kingdoms champion on your field, you can, cycle one of those, say a high-cost guy, and then search for any champion you want and add it to your hand. So it gives you a chance to, start building up that hand, to start building up that immediate one-turn kill shot. You also have, if you're kind of struggling, you have the Grand Chancellor, Cao Cao the Cunning. I know I'm pronouncing that wrong because I can't pronounce Chinese. But yeah, this card here, it does kind of minus you, but it is one of the few cards that gains you a ton of action points. So if you can't get to the right general, or even if you're like, running other stuff outside of your archetype, to just do really big plays, Cao Cao works really well. You don't also have to run Cao Cao in a Three Kingdoms deck. He works very fun as a second general in, say, Shadow Prince. Just, just ideas, just spitballing things. In addition, as far as defense and as far as protection goes, none of these cards have specific protection on them, so you've got to, keep them alive. But, fortunately, they have some of the nastiest fortifiers in archetype in the game. Defensive Chibi, it's generic, so it doesn't necessarily count, and it's a rank 4, so it doesn't technically count. But if an opponent has more champions than you can just eliminate all of their champions, even the ones that are in defense stance and didn't attack. Incredibly powerful. But, not specific. I just saw that one as I was going down alphabetically to go find the one that I'm looking for here. Oh yeah, so Kongming's Maze is one of these here. When an opponent's champion declares an attack on one of your Three Kingdoms at champs, you can just negate that attack and end the entire battle phase, which, ends the opponent's turn. So, yeah, you can just immediately end an opponent's turn. Very powerful defense. It's in archetype. It's specifically for Three Kingdoms. So you do have to keep that in mind. It's not really splashable in anything else. But we're not talking about anything else. We're talking about how good the Three Kingdoms are. I just scrolled past an Olympian. I apologize. The Olympians are strong indeed, but I'm trying to decide, how well these guys stack up compared to Olympians or Sea Devils or anything else. This is the card I was looking for here. One of the best archetypal fortifiers to get printed here. If an opponent's champion attacks a Three Kingdoms champion on your field, you can eliminate that champion, so it's Endless Chasm, but it also damages that opponent equal to the attack of that champion. So if they had like a really big guy that attacked, they lose that big guy, they lose that Miyamoto Musashi, and they'll take, say, that 10,000 damage directly. That can just end turns. It's incredibly powerful here. So, Jonesy mentions, he says that Three Kingdoms is S tier. All of the support in the various lines of play make it the most versatile. And I am almost tempted to agree. I have mentioned many ways that this deck can pull off kills. In fact, I think it's one of the decks that I've done some storyboarding with this deck. I've come out, where if you can craft your opening hand with whatever you want, you can easily build like a 72,000 power attack on your first attacking turn. And that's with, I think, only using like 6 cards. So you can do some incredibly nasty things with this deck. And you could probably do better than that because I was using, not Art of War. So, if I am trying to keep that in mind, if I am trying to think about, problems that this deck has, it's resources, unfortunately. This deck is very good at, turning one piece of cardboard into a different piece of cardboard that you want. But outside of, specifically Sun Ren, it can't turn one cardboard into 2 cardboard. And that is kind of where the deck falls apart. Sorry, not really falls apart, but that's where it, has a failing that I think keeps it out of S tier. Because I mentioned that Camelot can turn a single piece of cardboard into basically a game-winning end board on its own. The Olympians, they have lots of ways of, getting their guys out. of, kind of cheating things. They can do a lot of things very strong. They can turn their cardboard into stronger cardboard, but they can't necessarily turn things into more cardboard. The Sea Devils, they are the kings of accruing lots of pieces of useless cardboard on your field. And then the Sengoku, they're also efficient at, turning their cardboard into stronger cardboard. Three Kingdoms, if it could also turn its cardboard into more, then I think that they would be S tier. If they can consistently get one-turn kills out on the board, I think they would be S tier. But you can't guarantee that Xiangfei is in your opening hand. You can't guarantee that, you get the Kongming's fan to search you the Peach Garden Oath. You can't guarantee that, you get Lu Bu out. If you're using Red Hair to get Lu Bu out, that actually kind of works against you because you can't damage your opponent for the rest of that turn. So I think that, Three Kingdoms hits like an S tier when it can hit, but the fact that, it's gotta, crouch and pose and, taunt its opponents a little bit before it strikes, keeps it out of S tier and puts it rather firmly in off the map clearly here. So over here, I'm putting it in A tier. So unfortunately, Jonesy, I can't agree with you on Three Kingdoms being S tier. Because again, I am very stingy about what I mean when I'm talking about tier 0. Well, I have S tier under it because I like calling it S tier, but I'm trying to go with the tier 0 format to, stick with more, card game stuff instead of like, mobile game unit terminology, because I came from that history recently. Very, very dark history. I don't recommend it. Mobile games are a poison and a curse upon our civilization. They're, in fact, one might say bad civilization. But no, I don't think that Three Kingdoms is so powerful that you have to, strategize specifically against Three Kingdoms or play specifically Three Kingdoms in order to win. Three Kingdoms, I think it can beat every deck on here, but it can also lose to every deck on here pretty evenly. And I think that, all the decks on here, they lose against and win against the decks in, tier 1 in A tier pretty evenly. I believe if I stack all these decks up, like, if I try to move things a tier up above them and, see how they do, I think that, going just a single tier up, that strategy can probably win, except for D tier, because, the Mongols are just that weak, and the SPQR don't have a strategy that can actually win a game. But I think, like, Aztecs can take a game off the Gaelics. I think that the Norse can absolutely take a game off the Sengoku. I think that, Shadow Prince can, lose games to Parasites. But, I don't think that, moving these guys up or down from here is particularly something that I'm willing to do here. But I do have the last bit of freedom that I've got with a tier list. The ability to move these guys around. Because right now, I'm currently in alphabetical order here. So, Camelot comes before Olympian because C comes before O. But, C comes before C, so it comes after C, apparently, but before S. Yes, that's how that works. So yeah, I want to kind of rearrange these guys a little bit in what I think their power is. Like, if I think that something is on the borderline of reaching the next tier or on the barely hanging on to its current tier, that, I'll put it near the end to, signify that potential loss or that potential gain. So, first off, I'm going to try and isolate the guys that we think are strong. So we mentioned that for the A tier, that, Jonesy believes that Sea Devils and Sengoku are both S tier, tier 0, format breaking decks that don't deserve to be in the same tier with the rest of the chaff that they're here with. I think that they hit a little bit above. Not too much above where they go in. I think that they are a little bit stronger, though. Like, Sea Devil, it has a pretty oppressive strategy on preventing the opponent from doing a lot of things. I don't think that the Sea Devils can necessarily stop somebody from doing a giant Lubu swing once they're ready. But, the Sea Devils can also quite easily, tear apart the mounting defenses that Three Kingdoms had to make up until that point. But they can't really punch them decisively for a win. As far as, putting one above the other, I'm torn. I want to say that, with Sea Devil's effect on all of the other archetypes in the game, that I want to put them above Three Kingdoms. Because this is where I can talk about other things that I didn't specifically consider as, hard benefits, like between power, between speed, and between, resourcefulness, or whatever I called that word 3 hours ago when I started this stream. So, if I am talking about other, categories outside of that, I consider, the rarity of the cards involved. And honestly, a lot of the rarities, Three Kingdoms suffers a bit more from the rarities. It's two big searchers in, it's three big searchers in Shun Yu, in Kongming's Fan, and in Red Hair. Actually, no, four. Su Liang. Yeah, those 4 searchers are all gated behind high rarity, so getting those in cardboard space is a bit rough. Whereas with Sea Devils, you're only losing Queen Anne's Revenge and Zhang Yusao. Zhang Yusao is an amazing commander, but you don't necessarily need it to make the deck work. It just kind of, rewards you for staying in archetype. Whereas, losing all of your searchers to high rarity is incredibly, difficult to get around. The fact that, the Three Kingdoms kind of struggles with removing a lot of opponents' resources outside of deploying the right Tiger Mythic, and not having protection for that Tiger Mythic outside of battle protection is a bit rough as well. So I think I'm going to put the Sea Devils at the top. I think that they are the closest to deserving S tier. Lubu, after that, it's a little bit rough. Camelot is strong. It's consistent. It combos really well. It has lots of incredible support in it. It has things that just say your Camelot champions cannot be eliminated. In battle, I think, but yeah. It has things like your Camelot champions can attack twice. Its enduring spells are so much better than the magics that, Three Kingdoms has afforded, which are increase your attack by 2,000 for all your champions, increase your defense by 2,000 for each champion. Three Kingdoms has a lot of things that, make it play faster, but Camelot is, I think, faster. So, honestly, I'm going to put Camelot above Three Kingdoms. Just barely, though. You can consider the middle ones as, not mattering at all, or, only mattering, a drop of water worth. But I think that, Camelot is on the verge of becoming broken. Meanwhile, I think Three Kingdoms needs some seriously stronger tools before it becomes so incredibly broken that, the format becomes warped around it. And plus, Three Kingdoms is so easy to answer with so many other cards here. Let's see. The Sengoku versus the Olympian. Do I think the Olympian are better than the Three Kingdoms? Not particularly. I believe the Olympians suffer from a lot of the same problems that I mentioned with the Three Kingdoms, and they can't really protect their guys. Yeah, they can get them back out of the grave, but they can't really protect them. Mount Olympus is there to make up for the card advantage that's lost, and that might be enough. But then if we're counting high rarities, and we've got to count all the support. And Three Kingdoms has a lot more support of replacing cardboard with better cardboard than Olympus has. So I feel pretty confident about keeping Three Kingdoms in front of Olympians. The Sengoku, do I think they're better than the Olympians? Honestly, not particularly. The rarities are fine. There's some fine rank 3 support in the Sengoku archetype, but a lot of it's not necessarily limited to Sengoku. Revenge of the Eco Iki counts itself as a Sengoku card, but you can run it in any deck you want. The same with Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the 3-star general that did not get a reprint. It could just sacrifice itself to steal a card. It doesn't need other Sengokus on the board to get its effect off. It's a strong card. As far as its resilience, as far as its end board, I think its end board is honestly a bit weaker than the Olympians as well. So I feel pretty confident with saying that the Sengoku is at the end of A tier. I think it's definitely above the B tier. I don't think it's, at risk of it falling off to become a B tier. But, I am, quite confident with putting it at the bottom of, A tier here. Or at least, in the middle, and if something else creeps up to A tier, it's probably going to go behind it. If I decided to shove Norse or Shadow Prince there, I think they're firmly behind Sengoku. Speaking of which, I did mention that, 3 of the archetypes that I think that could kind of brush up to A tier are the Heavenly, the Norse, and the Shadow Prince. They're there, but, how good are they? So, Heavenlies, they're honestly just better than the Gaelic. I think the Gaelic, are going to probably end up near the back of this anyway. In fact, I don't think the Gaelic are better than the Norse, and I don't think they're better than the Shadow Prince. In fact, doing it by the weakest ones might be better here. The Iga, as a standalone archetype, they're honestly not really good as a standalone archetype. You can't just run Iga cards and win. You can't throw Iga in anything outside of Sengoku and win. You can do an Iga and then a generic Sengoku package with say Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and make that a half of a deck with say parasites or whatever you want to do. But I don't think that Iga on their own are better than the Gaelic on their own. The Gaelic, they have a win strategy. They have a way of beating the game. The Iga, they lack that. But, they are very good cards. They can win games. Onino Hanzo is kind of a win condition on its own. But, on his own, he takes effort to deploy. You need to be fully vested in the Iga, which means you have to be fully vested in a lot of substandard cards. So I'm pretty confident with, the back 2 of B tier being on this. Not necessarily saying that they're so bad that they're going to fall into C, just like, the back 2 of A tier. I'm pretty confident that neither of these are better than Shadow Prince, Norse, or the Heavenlies. So next up here, you know, I've got the Heavenly, the Norse, and the Shadow Prince. The Heavenly, I can't see them being better than Norse. Like, Norse is one of the ones I felt the worst about, you know, having in B tier instead of in A tier. They have an incredibly strong... Actually, no. This is hard. This is very hard, guys. So, the Shadow Prince, you know, they have that speed, they have that power, they have that one-shot strategy. They have that downside, though. They have that deck construction downside. You need to be fully vested in Shadow Prince. Like, you can't do Shadow Prince Aztec. You can't pull off Shadow Prince Three Kingdoms. You can't pull off Shadow Prince Camelot really well. Like, you need to be invested in the Shadow Princes, because their cards work to protect Shadow Princes. Their cards, you know, work to, you know, remove the power of other people's cards. They remove other cards. They remove the effects of your own cards. And a lot of other archetypes can't appreciate that the way that Shadow Prince does. So, yeah, you know, you could do, like, you know, Shadow Prince Olympian and, like, you know, cheat out guys from your grave. You could do, like, Shadow Prince and Goku, cheat out guys from the grave. The possibility is there, but it's, you know, they feel kind of xenophobic. The Norse, though, honestly, they're more xenophobic. I think I'm good with that. I think I'm good with saying that the Norse are a bit more xenophobic and want to play more in archetype than even the Shadow Prince does, which is weird. Because all three of these archetypes, they have enough cards to, you know, be their own thing. And, you know, they want to be their own thing, but they're not... I had to judge them, you know, I'm adding in splashability as a factor because they're both pretty even to each other. Like, you know, they are strong strategies, they can win the game, they take some ramp up, they take some risk in deck building, and they take some risk in execution. In that, you know, all of their cards are vulnerable to removal, all of their cards, you know, have inherent risks in deck building, and, like, you know, either zapping your own heartbeats, or, you know, having a lot of high-cost guys, or having a lot of enduring cards that don't really do anything to win you the game. But I think out of those, you know, having high-cost guys is not the worst thing you can do. Like, I splashed a Sathanas into a deck, but I've also considered, like, you know, splashing multiple Heimdall and, like, a Cert into a deck in order, you know, cheat guys out. But that's not really utilizing the Norse archetype, because the Norse are, like, you know, cut your life points, get big things out. The Shadow Prince are, like, just get big guys out and prevent your opponent from doing things. And I think that end strategy is a bit better than the Norse, and a bit better than the Heavenly. So I think this wraps up what I think B tier should look like. I think that out of these, Shadow Prince is the most likely to move up to A tier, but I don't think it's there. Same with the Norse, same with the Heavenly. But these three are, you know, above the Gaelic and the Ega. But I'm not going to do a tier list with, you know, 7 different tiers. That's silly. So they're all together in the same bucket. All these guys, you know, they can compete with each other. They can do pretty well. They trade blows. Ega are particularly there to go remove all the big guys that the Shadow Prince are bringing out, or that the Norse will threaten you with, so on and so forth. Next up for our C tiers, let's see. So all of these guys had 3 different unique failings. The Aztec priests had a way of winning the game. They had an incredibly powerful strategy that just took way too long and was way too resource intensive to actually make playable. So that was a bit of a problem for them. Let me catch a Bidoof here really quick before I continue. So yes, the Aztecs had that going on. The Mermaiden didn't really have a way of winning the deck, but they had like an incredibly cohesive and, efficient strategy. And the Parasites also had a cohesive and efficient strategy that did an even worse job of winning the game. But their strategy was far more efficient. So how do I judge these? Well, obviously, first off, none of these guys are leaving C tier. None of these have any hopes of ever being anything but C tier on this list. But I think out of these, the Mermaidens are the closest to falling into D tier. Meanwhile, the Parasites and the Mermaidens, they fit the same category of, resourceful dudes that, eliminate things and are kind of efficient. It's just, the efficiency of the Parasites puts them above and beyond things. In fact, I think that puts them so far above and beyond that the Parasites will probably go at the top of the C tier list. Just because if it's got away the ability to win the game versus the ability to, prevent the opponent from winning the game, I think preventing them is at least good enough for what the Parasites were intended to be, which is, a sub-archetype. They're always were going to be a hybrid of Parasite plus something else. And I think Parasite plus something else is a very good deck strategy. Whatever, your other archetype is trying to do, the Parasites allow it to work by giving you defense, by giving you resources, and by, giving you that time to get your slower strategy up. In fact, it is criminal that, the Parasites and the Aztecs are next to each other, one wanting for a way to win the game, and the one wanting for resources, and they can't be together, because all the Parasite are Shadow, and the Aztec need light types to work. So even though they've got this C-tier romance, they were tragically never meant to be. But yeah, the Mermaidens, they fit the same yoke as the Parasites do. They just do it so much worse. And then finally, D tier. I know this is alphabetic, but honestly, this works exactly the same way that alphabetical works. You can build a Mongol deck. It plays like a deck of Mythic. You could possibly even win a game with it if the opponent is that unlucky. Or if they're playing a cobble of SPQR cards. Because the SPQR, they don't even have a winning strategy. The Mongols pretend to have a way to win the game. They can't do it. SPQR have given up all hope of pretending. They are a toolkit, given a name. So yeah, unfortunately, they are going to be the bottom of the bottom here. But there is one other thing I do want to mention here. One other, I was going to think about bringing up these guys, but I didn't, because if I fairly brought these guys up, then I would have to bring up a lot of other, things like, Cuddle Muffin or the Macedon that just are, basically 3 cards sharing an archetype. Or 4 cards sharing an archetype. But I wanted to bring up the Sanctus. So Sanctus, I have some pictures of them here, so let me go and find one of those in our Discord announcements channel or something. Pools, maybe collection picks, perhaps. Let me scroll through history and find these, because the Sanctus, oh boy, do I want to talk about the Sanctus. The Sanctus are, the very spicy inclusion of Christian mythology in a trading card game. So yeah, if we're including the Norse deities, if we're including the Hindu, like the Samsara deities, why not include the Christians? And our answer was, we will. We will absolutely have Christian mythology represented in this game, which is very fun and very funny. But, obviously, with these cards, are they, are they strong? Are they, are they worth including? So I want to bring up, first off, the core card that, supposedly is the payoff and board card of the Sanctus archetype. We are looking at the copy that I pulled of Archangel Michael, the Warrior of Heaven. In order to deploy this guy, well, first off, he has an unknown amount of attack and 0 defense. Let me zoom in a little bit to make him a little bit bigger, just not that much. Okay, I guess we're working with, small font size. Deal with it. Actually, no, I can make this a bit bigger. So do this, zoom in, and then scroll down. Yes. So if there are 2 Sanctus champions each on your field, in your grave, and on an opponent's field, you can deploy this card. You can deploy one general from your field to an opponent's general slot. This card's attack equals the number of Sanctus cards on the field and in your grave times 2,000. And then finally, this card can only attack players who control Lucifer the Fallen Angel. It's also unaffected by fortifiers. So this card kinda sounds strong. Like, if these Sanctus champions that they talk about are easy to deploy, easy to get on the field, in your grave, and on an opponent's field, then you can bring this out. If you can have a ton of them, potentially you could have, tens of thousands of attack. So how easy are these Sanctus cards to bring out? And the answer is they're not. They are not easy to bring out. So I am failing to find a direct picture of one of these guys here. So let me scroll a little bit better and see if I can find them. But I will describe what a Sanctus champion is, because there are 4 of them that are, going to be coming out in the Forbidden Tide set here. It's less of like a real archetype and more of a teaser for the future to, let us know what could be coming at some point later on in the future. But right now, the cards that we currently have to play with of the Sanctus archetype, they are unplayable. They are all 5-cost champions. Since you get 4 AP a turn, you've got to, spend at least 2 turns to get the AP necessary. They are all 0 attack, 0 defense champions. So they're not winning you any battles in combat here. They have a nasty effect on all of them, where they take damage while they're in defense stance. So regardless of what stance they're in, an opponent can attack them and deal full damage to you through that Sanctus champion. They don't have any way of protecting themselves on the field. So if an opponent decides to attack this champion that you spent 5 AP deploying, you take a bunch of damage and goes to the grave. They don't have any effects that are really helpful either on deployment or on going to the grave. I will note that Mary, the rank 3 of it here, it does let you search for a Kyla. Yeah, it does let you search for, I believe, a Kylus. Sorry, hold on, what is it here? I'm gonna go find the card really quick and then take a picture here really quick. So give me a second. Yes, I am too busy using my phone to see chat here, so I'm not going to take a picture of this here, but I'm looking at Saint Mary, the Virgin Mother, the soul rank 3 of the set here. You can see the soul rank 4 is this Mythik on the screen. This champion takes damage while in defense stance. When deployed, you can add one Kylus or Shadow Prince General from your deck to your hand. As a side note, currently no Kylus generals exist. So that's, one of those, for the future, there could probably be a lot of really nice cards that play with this archetype. Back to the effect. You can only use this power once per turn. Once per turn, you can deploy one other champion from your field to your opponent's champion slot. So what that does, it has a lot of... the Sanctus archetype is filled with just cards that have really negative effects when they're on the field. And, it gives you ways to give those champions to your opponents. So it's a cool idea. You deploy really negative cards, then give them to your opponents. The problem is, right now, it is prohibitively difficult to get that many champions in the right place to get this mythic out. To deploy 2 champions on your field, you need to spend 10 AP. AP is not cheap. That's, 3 turns of saving up. So if you have those on your field, again, they don't have protection. An opponent can, try and see what you're doing. They can attack them, deal full damage to you, and, now they're not on the field anymore. They're in your grave, which I guess is cool, but you still need them on the field. You also need to get them on your opponent's field, which is another problem. Because an opponent isn't going to want to keep them on their field. They're going to, they'll either take the loss and, sacrifice them off their board, or, one of the Sanctus champions actually, forces a player to, send things off of their field to the grave. So they'll just use that effect and send their Sanctus off, so they don't have it on their field anymore. It's not counting. So this card that you're looking at is the hardest card to deploy in the game. Even harder than the funny victory promo mythic. You cannot actually get this thing out reasonably in any sort of play against an opponent that is, sentient. I'm sure that, somebody could, craft a strategy and be like, oh, hey, let me do this, it'll be really funny, and get this card out. But, you have to go through a lot of hoops just to get the deck to perform in a way that even makes this possible. So, yeah, the Sanctus archetype, it's bottom of the barrel. Not only is it unplayable, it actively sabotages itself. It is that bad currently. So yeah, right now, at the very least, the Mongols and the SPQR are not currently the worst archetype in physical print. But that's only because this is a spoiler. Basically, the cards that we know about in this archetype are so incredibly bad that there has to be some really nasty, really weird mechanics to make this work. And this is something that looks relatively unexplored even in other card games that I've seen. Obviously the idea of, giving opponents negative cards isn't novel to card games. It's not even novel to Mythic. One of the, what was it? Yeah, the Gaelics, actually, they give your opponent an enduring card that just burns their heartbeats every turn. So yeah, giving opponents negative cards isn't, novel. But, giving them expensive cards that, might take you several turns to deploy, that's incredibly new. So I'm looking forward to seeing, what Sanctus does later in the year, because right now Sanctus is so bad, I can't even think of a way to, deploy their cards. Because all the other Sanctuses, in order to, do the funny thing of give them to your opponent, you need to have 2 of them on the board at once. Remember, 2 of them is 10 AP. So you spent your entire turn, deploying those guys to your board just to give one of them to your opponent, rather than, spending those physical pieces of cardboard to instead just, like, trebuchet their back row or ballista their front row and punch them directly with your other win condition anyway. So yeah, if Sanctus was on here, I would have it so far below the tier list it's not even on the tier list. So yeah, let's shrink paint down, drag you over here. Okay, you're roughly the size of a card. Can I click on this guy? Here we go. So you're down here below the tier list, off the screen, just currently beyond unplayable. So yeah, that is going to be, what I believe we are looking at here on this. So yeah, we've got, currently we're not in a tier 0 format. I don't think there is a specific deck, or archetype at least, that is so overwhelming that you're forced to play it or counter it. We have a lot of viable archetypes to choose from. Granted, 2 of those are from the new set, so a lot of people won't have access to those cards in their hand yet. If you do want to build into those archetypes, the Olympians, they will have a battle deck here very soon. The Sengoku are pretty much exclusively in Ancient Legends, which is now out of print. But we will be seeing some of them again in Forbidden Tides here pretty soon. And, I think Three Kingdoms is one of the easiest ones to actually build, because the set is entirely in the second set, Twilight Immortal, which you can currently get. As far as the B tiers here, Norse Lord of Thunder, the Norse deck is going to be the other battle deck that's out. You can see that, both of those battle decks are going to be competitive. They are going to win you games. And yeah, the rest of the archetypes are as such. So, if you guys are good with this, I believe this is going to be our final version of the tier list. At least for now. Because come, what was it, June, July-ish, we will have Forbidden Tides fully released. Because I can tell you right now, we don't know all of the cards in it yet. There is a new archetype in it. And I'm not the first one to hear this here, but I'll tell it to you guys who are listening to the stream right now. We have the Druidic archetype. We have Druids coming to the game. It's an archetype with a single champion, 4 extra deck mythics, and a very large selection of magic cards. If that makes you think of anything similar in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game, you might be thinking in the right direction. Anyway, I think I'll leave you on that cryptic note here. So yeah, for the people who wanted to run to the end of the video once I post it on the YouTubes, here you go. Here's the tier list. Here is what Mr. Champion Man thinks is the strongest cards. You can ignore everything else that I said before and just immediately throw all of these cards directly into the deck as is, and you will totally win the game, and you don't need any more context beyond that. Have a good day, everybody. It was a pleasure streaming for you here. I'm going to navigate to that fancy, end of stream window here, and, yep, take care.